Chapter 455. Su Sheng was speechless. He pointed at Qin Zhao. You, but Li Yunxin smiled. So where is the cultivation method she left behind? Su Sheng's face turned red as he repeated, she's your grandmaster. I won't allow this. Li Yunxin pursed his lips. You don't want to tell me? I'll find it myself. If I can't find it, I won't help you find your body. After saying this, he turned around and started searching the bookshelves again. He muttered something like, I didn't want to tell you, but you just had to ask. He did not take Su Sheng's feelings to heart. Since this was the residence of the art saint, there must be many powerful restrictions. Even the little things that the saint set up casually were enough to give Li Yunxin a hard time in the realm of true enlightenment. But later, magic was forbidden in this space, so the powerful restrictions lost their effect. Only some less advanced methods such as the rope trick that Li Yunxin had used to climb the mountain were left. When encountering such things, he could break them with a little thought. Thus, in just a quarter of an hour, he had already searched through all the books on the shelves. He had gained a lot. Qin Zhao, the art saint, seemed to be very idle. There were many small booklets on the bookshelves, in which some of his experiences were recorded. Li Yunxin did not understand some of them, but he knew that they were not very difficult. As long as he had a good foundation, everything would become clear. The other things that he could understand were actually some ingenious ideas and insights. For example, I suddenly had an idea today. Could we do this? Although the previous method failed, the smoke from the mountain's explosion was quite beautiful. Last night, 0A dared to slack off. Today I'll see if he still dares to slack off after I pull out his brain. And so on. Li Yunxin was not an amateur in painting. He was also very smart. In the past, it was difficult to learn because it was like building a castle in the air. It was not easy to get started. Now that he had seen so many fragmented realizations, a certain system was swiftly and deftly constructed in his mind. He looked, thought, and took them. When he put away all the books and booklets with Chen Hua's handwriting on the bamboo bookshelf, he understood some things. Thus, he felt that he understood why there were so few experts in the school of painting back then. It was said that in the past 1,000 years, there hadn't been a single Taoist painter in the profound realm. The one with the highest cultivation was only at the true realm. Moreover, although the school of painting, Daotong and Kenzo were listed as one of the 3 righteous sects of the profound sect at that time, the number of people in the school of painting was extremely small. It was only equivalent to a sect of Daotong or Kenzo. After all, the school of painting had appeared late, so it was understandable that there were fewer people in the beginning. But the problem was that Qin Zhao had appeared 2,200 years ago. In just 200 years he had the cultivation of a saint. In the following 1,000 years, the school of painting had developed for a whole 1,000 years. Such a long time, even with the average lifespan of a cultivator, it had gone through more than a dozen generations. Was there no one with outstanding talent? Why did it continue to decline? Until tonight, Li Yunxin felt that he had probably found a reason: the problem with the cultivation method itself. The saint of painting was not good at painting. Painting, the skill of painting. When Li Yunxin first started cultivating the Tao of painting, Li Chunfeng told him that he had to first practice painting skills. A simple principle was that the more realistic the essence, qi, and spirit of the things you drew, the easier it would be to activate the spiritual qi in them. In the early stages of the cultivation of this path, painting skills occupied a very important supporting position. Actually, at that time, Li Yunxin felt that this cultivation method was actually very unfriendly to beginners. For beginners, it was difficult, obscure, and difficult to understand. The artists in the secular world had obtained the Tao of painting that had been lost to the outside world. The most talented ones could only reach the void state or the transcendent state. Now that he had comprehended the scattered relics left behind by the saint of painting, he finally realized that the problem with this cultivation method was actually with the saint of painting herself. Qin Zhao was very bad at painting. Thus, when she cultivated this cultivation method, she had to put in twice the effort for half the result. Ordinary people probably wouldn't be able to cultivate in this situation. But she was very smart, so she thought of all kinds of crooked ways to go about it. In the end, the cultivation method passed down by Shenmu was modified by Qin Zhao into a method that was only suitable for her to cultivate. Or rather, it was suitable for people who were bad at painting to cultivate. But the original guiding principle didn't change. The more realistic the objects were and the closer they were to the source, the more beneficial it would be for cultivation. These two strange contradictions overlapped and entangled. Later on, cultivators were guided by her and innocently went down the wrong path. It was supposed to be the easiest cultivation method to understand, but cultivators had to take into account the shape, in the beginning. It would be strange if they could cultivate it well. As for whether Qin Zhao knew all this? Actually, Li Yunxin felt that even if she knew, she didn't seem to be someone who liked to teach and educate people. Moreover, what could she say even if she knew? Because I only know how to draw circular heads and stick like claws, there's something wrong with my technique. Don't follow my method. As for how it came about, I can't be bothered to study it. She wouldn't do that. Thinking of this, Li Yunxin suddenly laughed. Su Sheng, who was standing at the side, was even more annoyed when he saw this. If he was still the saint of the past, he wouldn't care about these things. But in this life he had started to cultivate lust, so he didn't have a heart as still as water. Plus, he didn't know why, but there was some kind of pent-up anger in his heart that he couldn't bear to see this happen. Thus, he chanted a spell to Li Yunxin. You're actually laughing. I know you're carefree and unrestrained, but there's always a limit to everything. As the saying goes, even a vicious tiger won't eat its cubs. Even a despicable bandit wouldn't do something to himself. Li Yunxin, you'd better give up. Previously, when Li Yunxin was searching the bookshelves and thinking slowly, Su Sheng had been muttering to him. Now that he interrupted Li Yunxin's train of thought, he frowned. He turned around and stared at Su Sheng seriously for a while. Old comrade, let me ask you, which generation of calligrapher were you in the past? Su Sheng was stunned and didn't respond for a moment. Li Yunxin snorted, the 259th generation of calligrapher, right? Let me ask you again, which generation of sword saint was Zhuomuxia? Without waiting for him to answer, Li Yunxin snorted again, the 214th generation of sword saint, right? He clapped his hands, ha. Daotong and Kenzo both belong to the Xianmen. In fact, the difference in their names is only a difference in their skills. The people of Kenzo are respectful when they see the masters of Daotong, while the masters of Daotong are trembling when they see the sword saint. In essence, they're all the same. What about you? You got together with the saints who are 45 generations older than you, and even had a child and a family. Why are you pretending to be a little white flower here? He didn't speak at all, but once he did, he was really mean. He didn't care that he was dragged into it. According to the secular world, Su Yusong, the calligrapher, and Zhuomuxia, the sword saint, were indeed his ancestors. In terms of sharp-tongued, few people in the world could compare to him. Su Sheng was a little stunned by his words. After a while, he said in a low voice, how long ago was that? Later on, we became saints. How can ordinary human relationships compare? Li Yunxin spread out his hands, turned around and continued to search. But he didn't stop talking. Ah, yes. In your world, it's not something that can be measured by ordinary human relationships. In my world it's, treacherous. He picked up a porcelain bottle the size of a palm and looked at it. Suddenly, a thin arm stretched out from the bottle and pretended to gouge his eyes. At the same time, it scolded in a soft voice, what are you looking at, you stinking hooligan? Li Yunxin put the bottle into his sleeve and raised his hand to fiddle with an unknown flower that had not yet withered on the table. But if you really want to be serious, let me tell you this. My soul, you don't need to know why, has nothing to do with you. My body is not the body that was born in the past. Now it's dragons. So, in fact, I have nothing to do with Su Yusong or Zhuomuxia, the so-called Li Yunxin he. He fiddled with it for a while, put away the flower and turned to look at Su Sheng. I want to say that I'm Li Yunxin and I'm Li Yunxin. I want to say that I'm a big demon and I'm a big demon. What ethics, old mister? Is it because I'm too much like a human these days? He stared at Su Sheng gloomily, revealing 2 rows of slightly sharp teeth, and smiled ferociously. So, you have forgotten that I'm actually a monster that eats people? Su Sheng was stunned. Then his expression turned serious. Now, although he was Su Sheng, although he was a young man, although he also had many desires that secular people had, he still had the memory of the 259th master of calligrapher. So, now that he was threatened by Li Yunxin in such words, the pride in his heart that belonged to the master of calligrapher rose again. He no longer muttered. Instead, he straightened his body and put one hand behind his back. His aura instantly became deep and firm. Li Yunxin, are you threatening me? However, Li Yunxin sneered, turned around and continued to do his own things. Su Sheng was silent for a while and said in a low voice, you have to know that she is the art saint. As for me and Zhuomuxia, you also have to know that we are both saints. The saint is not just a cultivation realm, nor is it just a cultivator. It also means the honor of the celestial sect. You love her, but you can hide it in your heart. But have you ever thought that are you worthy of a saint? Li Yunxin's back was facing him and his movements stopped. But soon he continued to flip through the paper. So it's because of this? What? Su Xing frowned. Chapter 456. Li Yunxin fiddled with it for a while. He picked up some of the papers and put them away before turning to look at him. Are you unhappy? He raised his hand and gestured. For example, who do you think you are to admire a saint? When we were with the painting Saint on Yunshan, we didn't even know where you were. Now you have come to a place like this and say in front of me that you admire a saint. Are you unhappy because of these things? Su Xing furrowed his brows again. Nonsense. You have to understand. However, Li Yunxin took a step toward him. The soles of his shoes stepped on the bamboo floor. A clatter interrupted his words. I suddenly remembered something. When you, Su Xing's reincarnation, saw me, you mentioned to me more than once that you were my ancestor. At the time I didn't pay attention. Only now do I realize that your words had the meaning of, don't look at how impressive you are now, but I am your ancestor. Su Xing's brows furrowed even tighter. Then he smiled. Looking at it, it was as if he was so angry that he smiled. Why would I have these thoughts? At this point, he was interrupted by Li Yunxin. Then here comes the problem. Your reincarnation said that you wanted to experience the worries of the world. How long has it been since you experienced the tribulation with this body until now? How many tribulations have you experienced? The change in his words was abrupt, but it was also his usual style. It was difficult for others to keep up with his strange thoughts, so they could only blindly follow his lead. Su Xing stared at him suspiciously for a while. Suddenly his brows relaxed. He seemed to have thought of something. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, 5 or 6 years. I've experienced many surging worries. Li Yunxin took another step closer to him and stared at him seriously. When you were in the Qing army camp, you told me that the surging worries drowned you and made you unable to pull yourself out. At the time, I already had something I wanted to ask you, but I didn't. But today I really want to ask. In the past, you went from being emotional to being emotionless and experienced many long and boring years that normal people could not endure. After that, he used the memories of the saints to create a tribulation body and descended to the mortal world to experience the tribulation. Such a tribulation body, be it temperament or willpower, is definitely not something an ordinary person can compare to. And if you want to talk about sorrow, there are many weak mortals in the world who lost their parents when they were born and have been abused since they were young. After growing up, he finally found a trace of warmth, but it was snatched away in the blink of an eye. Having no way to seek help, having no way out, and having tasted the indifference and contempt of the world, these fragile mortals can still keep their hearts intact after experiencing such hardships. How did you lose yourself in just a few years? You're a sage who has been cultivating for thousands of years. Su Xing opened his mouth, but no words came out. Li Yunxin paused and sighed. I didn't think too much about it. I thought you should know a lot of things. But when I saw you lose your composure just now, I suddenly realized, maybe I'm in this mountain. If you can be lost because of other things, you can also be lost because of this. Su Yusong, have you ever thought of this possibility? In fact, you have already experienced all the tribulations that can be experienced. But, there are still some things that you can never experience in the mortal world? Su Sheng's throat trembled and his mouth gurgled. He could not speak. It was as if he could not control his excitement and was finally about to obtain what he had been longing for a long time. What is it? He asked in a low voice. Li Yunxin looked at him calmly. When you reached the saint's emotionless state, you were already at the peak of the mortal world. In terms of cultivation and magical power, you are the strongest in this world. In terms of power and wealth, you are the most prosperous in this world. As a saint, you have no sorrow or joy. Only mortals respect you as an immortal, and cultivators respect you as a god. There is no reason for you to envy or be jealous of them. After you entered the tribulation with this body, maybe you can feel a lot of emotions. But there is one thing that is extremely difficult for you to understand, right? That is the feeling of jealousy that I was talking about just now. Jealousy is also one of the 8 sufferings of the world. However, what in this world can make you have such feelings? No one in the world is worthy of it. Although you have no magical power, you can borrow the power of heaven and earth. The cultivators today are just your disciples and grand disciples, and the wandering souls of the Freemasonry are even less worthy of your attention. You also have the memories of your previous life, and you know that those powerful people today are just ants in your eyes. Until? Li Yunxin laughed. You found that there is a person in this world who has a method that you never knew. And he used that method to pull your clear consciousness out of the ocean of sorrow, and not just once. And then this person, this smart, handsome, and invincible young man, also fell in love with someone who was once a saint like you. You and she both have the status of a saint. You are angry because that person fell in love with the art saint. In fact, you can't even tell if it is because of this or because you actually benefited from his method and became someone who needs his help. A mere child actually has such ability, and now he even wants to enter our honorable and unparalleled class. You are jealous of me, afraid of me, and think that I am someone who is on par with you, right? Su Sheng's lips trembled violently. He blinked his eyes quickly and stared straight at Li Yunxin, muttering to himself, I indeed never thought of this. Because the current you is not the real you. Li Yunxin sighed. The real Su Sheng who went through the tribulation, even if he had such feelings for me, he would suppress it, because of his former pride and self-esteem. Everything would be well concealed, and even he would not be aware of it. He would not be like you just now, meddling in other people's business just because I said I loved the art saint. You would be pestering me endlessly. Because the current you will laugh when you are happy and cry when you are sad. If you are jealous or dissatisfied, you will say it. These are all things that happen at the subconscious level. You are just expressing them instinctively. So this bitterness. Li Yunxin looked at him with a smile. Now I have helped you experience it. What you said before helped me pass the tribulation of love. What I said after that also helped you complete this tribulation. In the past, when I was cultivating, someone always talked to me about the fruit of fate, but I never really understood it. Tonight, I finally know that this thing called the fruit of fate really exists. He shook his head again and smiled. It is very mysterious, very wonderful, very mysterious. Su Sheng stood there in a daze for half an hour, and the surprise on his face finally disappeared. He let out a long breath, and his whole body relaxed because of this breath, as if many things in his body had been emptied. Li Yunxin. He looked at him seriously. I have never seen a person like you. You will definitely have a boundless future. Li Yunxin smiled. This kind of irrefutable universal truth, you don't need to repeat it in such a serious tone. Then now, tell me, where is the cultivation method left by the art saint? Su Sheng did not reply to his witty words. Instead, he continued to say seriously, today you helped me to achieve the tribulation body, but the fruit of fate is not finished yet. In the future, I will definitely repay you. But you have to behave yourself, be careful in everything you do, and don't be too unreasonable when you do things. After hearing his words, Li Yunxin stopped smiling. He suddenly frowned and stared at him carefully for a while. Suddenly his expression changed. Su Sheng continued, the cultivation method left by the art saint is naturally with Taoist Danqing. If you have a chance to leave this little cloud mountain, you can go there to look for it. What you want is not a profound painting method. They won't be so heavily guarded. With your intelligence, it shouldn't be difficult to secretly take it. Sigh. I thought that this tribulation body was hopeless, so I asked you to follow me to this floating mountain, and I planned to find the body and destroy it. This way, even if this tribulation body is destroyed, it won't be considered as coming to this world empty-handed. But tonight, your words enlighten me. It is also a great fortune. When he said this, Li Yunxin knew what he was going to do. He shouted in exasperation, Mother*** king bastard. I helped you with your tribulation, and now you want to leave me here? As he said this, he immediately pounced on him, wanting to catch him. However, after saying this, Su Sheng's body suddenly started to become thin. In fact, it was rapidly withering. This scene was still vivid in Li Yunxin's mind. That day in the Ziwei Hall of Mount Lord Dongting, the other tribulation body of the art saint, Su Weng, also rapidly withering after talking to him, and then breaking into powder. It seemed that the tribulation had been completed and he passed away. But the problem was, this bastard brought him to Cloud Mountain, and promised to help him find the cultivation method of the art saint, and then find his body. Then the two of them quietly left. But now he left halfway through the task. How could he get out of the pit that he had dug? He knew nothing about the floating mountains' palaces. But there was nothing he could do to stop this process. He could only watch as Su Sheng smiled. The skin on his cheeks collapsed rapidly, and the skin on his limbs loosened. His hair began to turn white and slowly fell, but he was still smiling happily and contentedly, which made Li Yunxin so angry that he wanted to. At this moment he suddenly heard a shout, "Suppress!" A ray of clear light flew in from outside the house and hit Su Sheng's chest. This light seemed to contain endless vitality and strength. Su Sheng, who was about to die, burst with vitality again. In the blink of an eye, he returned to his youthful appearance. Then, two people lifted the curtain and walked in. One was Su Yusong and the other was Zhuo Muzha. Chapter 457. The smile on Su Sheng's face froze. It was not only his smile that froze, but also his movements. He was supposed to fall slowly, but his arms were grabbed by Li Yunxin in a weird posture. Now he was standing on the ground in this posture like a statue. However, his face could still move. He glanced at the two fake saints and his expression changed countless times. Finally he sighed, alas. This sigh was not because of anything else, but because he did not tell Li Yunxin before. On the stone path, Li Yunxin asked him why he could still use his supernatural power to suppress those little people in the stone when he was fighting with the art saint after the supernatural power was banned in Mount Shaoyin. But at that time he was suffering from jealousy after being exposed by Li Yunxin. Naturally he did not want to tell Li Yunxin. He did not expect that now, the wandering soul whom he thought would never be able to master this technique actually did it. He used his physical body to perform this divine ability again. Using his own way of doing things to himself, he suppressed his culpa body. The fruit of sin, the fruit of sin. Tonight the fake saints looked like Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia. Su Yusong was an old man with white hair and beard. But his beard was neatly trimmed. 5 long strands of beard fluttered in the wind, as smooth as silk brocade. His white hair was combed into a Taoist bun. There was not even a strand of hair on his temples or forehead. It was as if he was painted. Although there were wrinkles on his face, they did not look old or ugly. Instead, they looked like they were cut by knives and axes, which made him look calm and steady. Zhuomuxia was even more so. He was already beautiful. With a little makeup he would look elegant and dignified. Even though the two of them were dressed in casual clothes, it did not conceal the nobility in their speech and actions. But looking at Su Sheng's words, when Li Yunxin first met him in the wine shop, he looked like a drunkard. His hair was messy and his clothes were loose. Although the tribulation body of the innate saint was not filthy, after experiencing so many days in his sleeve, fighting, running, dodging, and even dying, he was already in a sorry state just by looking at his appearance. Li Yunxin, on the other hand, was still fresh and handsome. His human body was transformed from the body of a demon. With just a thought, his white clothes, red lips, and white teeth would appear. There was no need to worry too much. Therefore, among the 4 of them, it was the reincarnation of the sage of calligrapher, who had the greatest supernatural power and was the one who looked the most miserable. And that was indeed the case. It was unknown how long Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia had been lying in ambush outside. Now that Su Sheng had entered the room, he waved his hand at Li Yunxin and said, "Dragon King, there is no need to panic. I said that Dragon King is our honored guest, so we won't be rude to him. On the other hand, thanks to Dragon King's efforts, he finally helped us capture this divine soul that escaped." Su Sheng squinted at Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin spread out his hands expressionlessly and said, "It's none of my business." While they were talking, the 2 fake saints had walked into the room. Zhuomuxia's eyes only briefly swept over the two, then he walked to the bamboo table and sat down, flipping through a few booklets on the table. These booklets were taken out by Li Yunxin, but he did not take them away. She only took a few glances and shook her head. "I've seen these things long ago. Now you treat them as treasures." As she said this, she looked up at Li Yunxin and said, "If you really want these, why don't you ask Shiliu for them? That child loves you, so there is no reason for her to refuse you." Li Yunxin smiled and said, "It is only comfortable to use things that are stolen with one's own ability. Don't you feel the same?" Su Yusong's eyes also stayed on the booklets for a while, then he looked at Li Yunxin and said, "Dragon King, sneaked into the floating mountain for these? Didn't Dragon King have the illuminating jade slip? Is there no cultivation method of the painting school in it?" Li Yunxin smiled again, "I won't tell you." Su Yusong also smiled as if he was treating a naughty child. "Well, we will talk about our business later." But, he turned to look at Su Sheng, but it seemed that he was still talking to Li Yunxin. When Dragon King was in the Lord Dongting Mountain, he met an old man who called himself Su Wang. Tan Liang reported this to me. Tan Liang? Dragon King should be familiar with him. He was the water monster Li Shan in Dongting at that time. Later he was brought back to Yunshan by Kun Wuzi. Li Yunxin answered. "That's why we all know how miraculous that old man is." Su Yusong said slowly, "We originally cultivated many forces in the states and counties near Dongting. Of course, I didn't pay attention to these small things before. They were all done by others. However, later I heard that Dragon King was in Dongting, so I wanted to investigate it. Then I found Su Wang, who had stayed in the Su family near Dongting for decades, had another identity. Ha, he looked at Su Sheng. That year we won your physical body, but your soul escaped. We have been searching for it for 1,000 years but to no avail. In the end, we found it with the help of Dragon King Li. But your reincarnated body soon met the tribulation. I could only wait patiently. But finally, I got a clue. Dragon King Yu, he turned to look at Li Yunxin again, the sage will not favor anyone casually. Su Wang could get in touch with you, so the reincarnated body was more likely to find you. So we waited patiently, until we got the news from somewhere that there was another reincarnated body of the Sage of Calligrapher in the human world, then we decided to give it a try. Su Yusong rubbed his hands. I said that I would send a set of Taoist instruments to Dragon King with the help of golden light. That's what I was thinking about. If the Dragon King and the other reincarnated bodies of the Sage of Calligrapher are still in contact, it means that the Dragon King is also an important role in the heart of the Sage of Calligrapher, and he will never let you die. Then, facing the situation where golden light came with the Taoist instruments, would the reincarnated body of the Sage of Calligrapher still not take action? As a result, you really subdued the Taoist instruments. Alas, my painstaking efforts were not in vain. Tonight, Muzha and I waited patiently for 6 days, and the Dragon King finally brought the sage to the floating mountain. It was also a big surprise for us. If the Dragon King did not bring the sage to Yunshan, our Taoist instruments would have been wasted. So, thank you Dragon King for your help. After he said these words, Li Yunxin stopped smiling. He frowned slightly. You mean, you led me into the trap and led the reincarnated body of the Sage of Calligrapher? So in fact I have been your bait? Dragon King, don't say that. Su Yusong frowned. Our friendship with the Dragon King is real. How can we belittle ourselves? But Li Yunxin frowned more tightly. You know that Su Wen contacted me in Dongting, so you speculated that this reincarnated body may also be related to me. Therefore you wanted to use me to lead him to Yinshan? What if he did not come? What if I did not bring him here? Su Yusong smiled gently. This kind of question should not be asked by the Dragon King. You are also a resourceful person, and you must know that no plan is perfect, certain, and inevitable. It was a surprise that the Dragon King brought him here. The fact that the Dragon King did not bring him here, or that he did bring him here, and that he did not try to boldly walk into the floating mountain without being noticed by us, it's only a matter of time before we spend more time and effort to continue to look for him slowly. It does not affect the overall situation. After he said that, Li Yunxin didn't say anything else. His face was very pale. It seemed that he never thought that one day he would be used as a bait. He did not realize that he was tricked until the end. And the person who set him up seemed to have fought with him many times. Since he left the mountain village, the Freemasonry seemed to have been watching him. Seeing his rare depressed look, Zhuamuzha looked at him a few more times. Then she smiled, shook her head, and continued to read the booklet in her hand. Since Li Yunxin did not say anything, Su Yusong turned to look at Su Sheng. So, I want to ask you, what made the sage value Li Yunxin so much? When he came to Yunshan you even worried about his safety. Why did you come here to wait for him and keep him safe? His words stunned Li Yunxin again. He turned to look at Su Sheng subconsciously. He was a smart person. How could he not understand what Su Yusong meant? It was not a coincidence that he met Su Sheng in the wine shop before. And it was not a coincidence that he met Su Wang in Dongting earlier. It was the former sage who deliberately contacted him. This time, Su Sheng knew that Li Yunxin was going to Yunshan. He was worried that Li Yunxin would suffer, so he created a chance encounter and gave Li Yunxin a lot of benefits. Since this idea came into his mind, Li Yunxin thought about what happened a few days ago. If Su Sheng was not there, maybe he had been seriously injured when fighting with the golden photon, and it would have been more difficult for him to take those treasures left by the sage. This result was indeed within his expectation, killing the golden photon and then going to Yunshan. But if he had been seriously injured, would the two fake sages on Yunshan still treat him so politely? And would Ku Chanzi, who was present before, let him go so easily? Li Yunxin opened his mouth, took a deep breath and looked at Su Sheng. Su Sheng, who was suppressed, was just one step away from him. But Li Yunxin looked at him as if he was looking at a stranger. Maybe there should be some gratitude and enthusiasm in his eyes. But at this moment, there was no such thing in his eyes. Instead, there was a little fear mixed with some disgust. It was hard to say what kind of look it was. It was only known that when Li Yunxin's eyes met Su Sheng's, he immediately withdrew them. Not only did he withdraw his eyes, but he also took 2 steps back, tripped over the bamboo chair and sat on it in a daze. He stared blankly at the bamboo floor, not saying a word. Su Sheng, who was frozen, sighed again when he saw him like this. Alas. Li Yunxin sat down only one table away from Zhuomuxia. But he didn't care at all. Zhuomuxia looked at him and said to Su Yusong with a smile, "Look, this child has been teased like this by you. I'm afraid his heart is like dead water." Alas. It's no wonder. I heard from Shiliu. As he spoke, he glanced at Li Yunxin from the corner of his eyes. He has always boasted that he is resourceful and ambitious. I think he was not convinced by us in the past, so he came to Cloud Mountain, planning to find a way out of danger, and also vent his anger at being schemed against by us. Now, he knows that he has been schemed against by us, and many of his previous methods were only effective because someone was secretly watching over him. How can he not feel sad? But Su Yusong smiled tolerantly like an honest elder. It's a good thing. Didn't we say that he was a good seedling to refine into a wandering soul? But now that we have brought the saint here, we don't need him for this. After getting the method to reconstruct the tribulation body of the 6 desires from our saint, isn't it the best material to refine the saint's tribulation body into a wandering soul? Since Shiliu admires him. I'll ask him later, but he is convinced. If he is convinced and is willing to work with us, you and I will be happy and Shiliu will also be happy. The two of them decided Li Yunxin's fate as if there was no one else around, but Li Yunxin didn't even say a word. Su Sheng finally opened his mouth at this time. I'm afraid it won't be so easy. As soon as he opened his mouth, Su Yusong finally let out a long sigh. Sigh. You finally spoke. Originally, before I fixed you in place, I was afraid that you hated me in your heart and wouldn't speak. Actually, back then I served you as a scholar and was by your side for nearly 100 years. You did take good care of me, you treated me like a human. Hearing this, Su Sheng snorted coldly. Human? Back then I was at the Grand Supreme Realm. Even if you were a dog, I saw that you were no different from a human. You thought that I treated you like a human, but how do you know that I didn't treat you like a dog? Su Yusong was slightly stunned, then he laughed and looked at Zhuomuxia. Look, now that the saint can get angry, I feel much closer to him. I used to think that after we took your body, you would definitely hate me in your heart. I really wanted to see what the cold and heartless saint looked like when he hated people. Now that I've seen it, it can be considered that my life wasn't in vain. These 2 wandering souls who had taken the body of the saint had now fixed the original owner of the body in place. They spoke with confidence and assurance as if everything was under their control. This situation was equivalent to a bandit killing an entire family and then taking the only survivor back to the house to be a servant. It was a terrible humiliation. However, in the face of such humiliation, Su Sheng sneered, "A villain is just arrogant for a moment because of his success. You ask me why I care about him? It's because in the end all of you might die in his hands. Daotong and Kenzo have existed for more than 50,000 years. The twists and turns and dangers in between are not something you 2 lonely ghosts can imagine. Who knows how many times you've been in a dangerous situation like today? Even if you steal my body for 1,000 years and control the Shenmen for 1,000 years, compared to the long history, it's just a moment. You can be arrogant today. In the future, once you lose power, I know what you're going to say," Su Yusong suddenly said, interrupting Su Sheng's words. The smile on his face grew wider, as if he was watching a wonderful performance. Because this performance was extremely rare, he had to speak and do things slowly so that he could savor the wonderful taste and not have regrets when he recalled it later. In this situation today, you still have such high hopes for Li Yunxin. Let me think about it. Su Yusong put his hands behind his back and paced on the ground, as if he was deep in thought. Think about it. He's already in our hands. Why can you still say such words? What are you relying on? They were talking about Li Yunxin, but Li Yunxin still did not speak. It was as if he had really lost his fighting spirit and was disheartened. But Zhuomuxia looked up at him, and Su Yusong also shifted his gaze to him. For a moment, the room was extremely quiet, and even the chirping of the insects outside became clearer. After the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, Su Yusong walked to Li Yunxin and stopped. He looked down at him, and the smile on his face slowly turned cold. It's rare to meet such a smart person like you who is also good at acting. I actually want to see more. For example, your current disheartened look is very interesting. It reminds me of the past. When Yaqiong was young, she did something bad. She thought she was very smart and pretended to be innocent, but she didn't know that we had already seen through it, but just didn't say it. But she was still a child at that time. Now seeing you, Wei River Dragon King Li Yunxin again, playing childish tricks in front of us, it's more funny than cute. Su Yusong was silent for a while, and his voice also turned cold. Li Yunxin. When you were in the city of Wei, you plotted to kill Long Jiuziwen, and then used the city of Wei as a scroll to paint yourself. Then you used the yang qi of 300,000 people in the city of Wei to reconstruct your fiend god body, and became the dragon son today. Do you think you can hide it from the whole world? He said these words slowly and coldly. Li Yunxin's body finally stiffened. He raised his head and looked at him. But there was no emotion in Su Yusong's eyes, only cold light. You are a smart person. You should know that you can't hide it from the whole world. Thus, this time before this scheme was seen through by others and completely lost its value, he planned to use it once more. So you set up a wider array in the wilderness forest. Then you came to Cloud Mountain. Relying on your array, you were fearless and unafraid of death. What you did was to get as much information as possible before you died, to gain some benefits. Then you died in front of us, using the souls of countless cultivators and demons on the battlefield to reconstruct your dragon body for the second time, and even advance to a higher realm, right? Li Yunxin opened his mouth. The previous disheartened look on his face was completely gone. But what replaced it was even more intense shock and disbelief. This expression only appeared for a moment. The next moment, he suddenly raised his hand and was about to chop his forehead. But Su Yusong didn't move and only spat out 2 words coldly, "That array has been destroyed by us. Now you want to use that array to escape? I'm afraid that once you die, you will really die." Li Yunxin's hand stopped in front of his forehead. His arm trembled violently as if he was hesitating whether to do it or not. But after 3 breaths, he sighed dejectedly and put down his hand. His body also collapsed on the chair. She was truly paralyzed. Chapter 458. Zhuomuxia glanced at him and smiled. Then he lowered his head and continued to read the books. Seeing him like this, Su Yusong turned around and walked away without saying anything else. It was as if he wanted to let Li Yunxin have a good taste of failure. So Li Yunxin looked at Su Sheng in confusion. Su Sheng looked at him as well. It was as if he was trying to determine if he was acting or if he had been seen through. After a dozen breaths, Su Sheng's expression changed. He frowned. "You have been seen through?" After a while, Li Yunxin bowed on the chair and sat up straight. He spread his hands at Su Sheng without saying a word. They had been together for a few days. Su Sheng already knew why he did this. He was slightly stunned and suddenly shouted, "What do you look like now? You can't recover from a small setback." But Li Yunxin waved his hand weakly and interrupted him. Then he stood up with his hands on the armrests of the bamboo chair and looked at Su Sheng. He seemed to want to say many things but stopped himself. In the end he just sighed. I can't recover from a small setback." After saying this, he waved his sleeves. A pile of trinkets fell on the table. But they were not the things that belonged to the art saint. Instead, they were the more precious magic treasures that belonged to the Yunshan saint. The set of Taoist artifacts. "I can afford to play, but I can also afford to lose." As he said this, he picked up the magic treasures one by one and wiped away the mark he left on them. Then he placed them in front of Zhuomuxia. He was going to hand over all the magic treasures he had with him. How could Su Sheng not know the meaning of this? He immediately widened his eyes. "Li Yunxin, what nonsense are you talking about? How can these evil people give you any benefits? Didn't you see how they humiliated me? How can you bear to be a prisoner with such a temperament? You are a complete disappointment to me." But he was interrupted again by Li Yunxin. He turned to look at Su Sheng and sighed again. "I'm not talking nonsense. And I think you seem to have some misunderstanding about me. When I say I can afford to play, I'm not afraid of death. If there's something I can do, I'll try to do it. For example, I came to the lair of the bad guys in Yunshan. Mr. Su, to be honest, who wouldn't disappoint you and do what I did?" Li Yunxin looked at Su Sheng's expression. Su Sheng's eyes were indeed filled with disappointment. He wondered if one of his previous incarnations had experienced this kind of emotion. He shook his head again and laughed self-mockingly. "Being able to afford to lose means, as long as there is a chance to turn the tables, I will continue to play. But now, sigh. In the past, my previous plans were already the pinnacle of what I could achieve with my intelligence. I know I've tried my best, but I still can't beat them." That means, his skills are not as good as others. There was nothing to be ashamed of. I admit defeat. Li Yunxin smiled again and touched his sleeves again. He took out the talismans he had written at the foot of the mountain, the scattered magic tools, the magic brush and paper, and arranged them on the table one by one. Su Sheng's face was ashen after listening to his words. He gritted his teeth and said in a trembling voice, I misjudged you. You are a coward who is afraid of death. Li Yunxin paused and was silent for a while. Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia, on the other hand, did not say anything. They simply watched Li Yunxin slowly hand over the treasures on her body and listened to their conversation. They seemed to be interested in what was going on. Then Li Yunxin smiled again. He looked at Su Sheng and spread his hands. There's nothing wrong with what you said. Who would be willing to die if they could live? Mr. Su. He said with some regret, you used to be a saint, but you were taken over by them. You have the moral responsibility of inheriting the legacy of Daotong and Kenzo. Therefore you cannot live under the same sky with them. I understand and admire your persistence. But I'm just a child. I am only 15 or 16 years old this year. He tilted his head. Originally, I only wanted to cultivate to become an immortal and live a long life. It would be best if I could travel the world and taste all kinds of delicious food. It's just that I've been dragged into the battle between you experts. At first, no one cared about me. I couldn't breathe, so I was angry. I thought we should have some fun. But now I have no way out. I have no reason to die. He smiled bitterly. Everything I have done all this time is to live. If I came here for the purpose of living, I have no choice but to seek death. Is there something wrong with my brain? Think about it carefully. Don't you think it makes sense? He looked at Su Sheng. I have never had any responsibility or position to speak of. Su Sheng opened his mouth but no words came out. Because, it seemed, true, what Li Yunxin said was the truth. He was not a member of the Celestial Sect or the Freemasonry. He was also not a member of the demons. The only thing he was involved in was the death of his parents. However, his father was the successor of the painting sect. When it came to the painting path and the painting saint, the Celestial Sect and the Freemasonry were all dirty. Li Yunxin, the guy who almost stirred up the whole world, did not seem to have any position. It was just that many people had overlooked this point. After 2 breaths, Su Sheng closed his eyes. His mouth was closed and there was no longer any anger on his face. He no longer had any expectations for Li Yunxin. Or, he had accepted what he said. Li Yunxin turned to look at Su Yusong. He first took out the misty slave de Kai Di Mao and the along the river during the Qingming festival. Finally he took out the misty lock-toed palace. What I said just now is the truth. He looked straight into Su Yusong's eyes and said seriously, I don't want to die. Now that you have the reincarnation of the Saint of Calligraphy, you have a reason not to let me die. Everything I did in the past was for the sake of living. There is no irreconcilable hatred between me and your organization. Since I came to Cloud Mountain, the 2 saints have always treated me with courtesy. There is no need to seek death. I am a smart, pragmatic, and adaptable person. The 2 of you must have recognized these valuable qualities of mine long ago. That is why you have kept me alive. So I think. Li Yunxin put the misty lock-toed palace in front of Su Yusong. Your organization is very suitable for my development. I hope I can get a chance in your organization. Give me a chance today and tomorrow I will give you a surprise. Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia blinked and exchanged glances. Although their expressions were normal, the 2 of them seemed to, had they ever seen such a guy? Admitting his failure was clean and neat and there was a bit of heroism. But in the blink of an eye, he said that he did it because he wanted to live and did not want to die. He could let bygones be bygones. But then, he turned to the person who was his mortal enemy just a quarter of an hour ago and said, Please join us. The 2 of them did not know how to describe this Li Yunxin anymore. In fact, there was no way to describe him. Su Yusong stared at Li Yunxin for a few breaths. Then he picked up the misty lock-toed palace. He casually looked at it and put it down. You should have a few wandering souls of my organization in your hands. Ah. Those senior and junior brothers are also in this misty lock-toed palace. Li Yunxin immediately answered. I have never bullied or mistreated them. They are also very tight-lipped. It shows that my organization style is firm and my strength is unfathomable. Su Yusong coughed. This Li Yunxin had already started to call himself senior and junior brothers, and my organization. This kind of tone and intonation, no matter who it was, would make people feel that it was fake and pretentious. But now that it came out of his mouth, everyone knew that he was purposely trying to curry favor, and was shamelessly magnanimous and exaggerated. But because of this they did not know what to say. He seemed to be such a person, but he had never acted according to common sense. He was definitely not a normal person. Zhuomuxia frowned slightly. He seemed to unintentionally look outside, then turned his head to look at Li Yunxin. He said lazily, Li Yunxin, These things you've handed over are just some playthings that don't matter. If you really want to join us. The translucent jade slip has been handed over to Xan Shilio. On the way to Cloud Mountain. Li Yunxin answered without hesitation and smiled naturally. If she didn't hand that thing over to you too, she is undoubtedly a spy of Munanju. Su Yusong silently looked at Zhuomuxia. Zhuomuxia was stunned, as if he did not expect Li Yunxin to blurt out these words so straightforwardly. Then he sneered. Good. Shilio, did you hear that? Did you see what kind of person your lover is? As soon as he finished speaking, the curtain was lifted. Xan Shilio walked in quickly and stared at Li Yunxin. She walked 2 steps in front of him and stood still. Li Yunxin, you already knew that I was a member of the Freemasonry, didn't you? Li Yunxin was stunned at first. Then he opened his mouth and raised his hands to salute. It's little junior sister. So, I was lucky to hand over the translucent jade slip to little junior sister. Xan Shilio's eyes widened. You didn't know. You didn't know. Don't you know? If you really don't know, what you said just now is putting me at death's door. Li Yunxin thought for a while and frowned. Then, should I know? Lies? Lies. What he said were all lies. I saw you clearly. Xan Shilio was enraged like a little lioness. She grabbed the broken pieces on the table and threw them at Li Yunxin's face. But how strong was Li Yunxin's body? He didn't even leave a white mark. He straightened up and sighed. Before this, everyone was just playing for their own master. What's real or fake? But I'll give you a word. Most relationships that start with deceit don't end well. Junior sister, remember this. Xan Shilio was even angrier after he said this. He looked around and saw a precious sword hanging on the wall as an ornament. She pulled it out and stabbed it directly at Li Yunxin's chest. I'll kill you. But the sword was broken. She was a cultivator who was not good at fighting and had forbidden supernatural powers. How could she hurt a demon in the advanced perfected master realm? Zhuomuxia sighed. Shilio, that's enough. This kind of person isn't worth your pain. Xan Shilio took the broken sword and scratched on Li Yunxin's body. Finally, she burst into tears. She threw the broken sword on the ground and ran out while crying. Li Yunxin looked at Su Yusong awkwardly. This kind of thing, no one wants to do. What can I do? Zhuomuxia acted like a mother-in-law who cared about her daughter. Su Yusong, on the other hand, behaved like a father-in-law who did not show his emotions on his face. Other than a brief moment of pride after he immobilized Su Sheng, he remained calm and collected the rest of the time. He looked like a schemer. As if he was still seriously considering Li Yunxin. When Li Yunxin said this, he smiled noncommittally. I thought I had to spend a lot of effort and use all kinds of temptations and threats to subdue you. In that case, although I felt a little regretful that you lost your integrity, I would still be happy that I got a general. But looking at you now, either you haven't really surrendered and still want to resist stubbornly. I really misjudged you. You actually don't have integrity. Speaking of which, I hope it's the former. In this way, even if I have to kill you, I can still see an outstanding and romantic person. Then tell me again. Is your situation the former or the latter? His expression was stern and his words were solemn. Li Yunxin could only sigh helplessly and ask himself to lower his voice. I have already done this much. There is nothing to prove. Whether you believe me or not, it's up to you, Saint. But I also want to ask you something. When I first came to Cloud Mountain, you told me that what you wanted to do was to preserve as much power as possible after the Celestial Gate of Wonders collapsed. Now, I want to confirm again. Is this true? Su Yusong thought for a while and his eyes drifted over Su Sheng. Yes. He said in a low voice, I have been a saint for 1,000 years. Many of my experiences can't be described in detail. But I was also a human before, not a monster. In the past 1,000 years, I have seen people, the rise and fall of the human world, the change of dynasties. The elders don't care about the people of the world. It is us who deal with them. I have watched the people of the world for a long time on Yinshan Mountain. They have become mine. That they have become mine, he spoke of, perhaps meant, they have become my responsibility. Li Yunxin could understand this. It wasn't like there weren't similar examples in the secular world. In the 46th year of Qingqi in the Qing calendar, an inconceivable case occurred in Huzhou. It was said that after many people reported for many years, it was finally discovered that the Huzhou magistrate, third-level official Zheng Daozhao, had been impersonated. The reason this matter was inconceivable was because he had been the magistrate for 9 years and had been a magistrate for 5 years. Even earlier, he had been a county magistrate for 11 years. When the case occurred, Zheng Daozhao was already 50 years old. 50 years old. For the people of this era it was indeed old. The truth of the matter was that this so-called Zheng Daozhao's real name was Su Dimao. Su Dimao was a scholar who had tried many times without fail. When he was in his 20s he was really poor and made up his mind to become a bandit. In reality he was similar to Lu Gongzan. What was different was that Su Dimao could see blood. Although he was also a military advisor, when he killed people he was even more vicious than those fierce-looking bandits. Very quickly he became the master of a stronghold. One year this group of people robbed and killed a scholar and his 2 attendants. When they inspected the belongings they found that the scholar was called Zheng Daozhao and was already 28 years old. 4 years ago, he had become a scholar and waited for 4 years to bribe people everywhere before he finally found a position. It was a remote county magistrate. Killing an official was not a good thing. Everyone panicked. But Su Dimao killed them without hesitation. After all, that small county was very remote, so it was better to do something big. So, he pretended to be Zheng Daozhao and went to the post with his official seal. His original plan was to find out the situation of the county treasury in the county, then open the door at night and rob the county treasury clean. Who knew that on that day, as soon as he stepped into the government office, someone would cry out for injustice. He was very brave and had studied before. When he was in the mood he really went to court to investigate the case. He had been a bandit for many years, so he naturally had a sharp aura. Besides, he had indeed studied before, so he judged the case in a straightforward and fair manner. He was called the Lord of Heaven. In his early years he had been looking forward to becoming an official. Now that he had become an official, wouldn't he be satisfied? So, he decided to play for a day and deal with the official business the next day. He might as well try all the accumulated cases in the government office one by one. Some of the accumulated cases were due to the negligence of the predecessors. Most of them were due to the scoundrels and ruffians, so it was really hard to judge. However, Su Dimao had already killed dozens of people. Why would he be afraid of these hooligans? How could he not know their methods? Within one day he cleaned up all the cases. So, the people in the county knew that God had opened his eyes and a Lord of Heaven had come. And so, until the next day, Su Dimao became more and more proud and decided to deal with the official business on the 3rd day. In the end, the more he played, the more addicted he became. In the end, he couldn't bear to give up the feeling of making decisions for the people, being respected and respected. But at this time his former bandit companions came to urge him. Evil thoughts rose in his mind and he came up with another plan. He released the news and asked his companions to come at a certain time. And he brought the constables, axes, bows and arrows and secretly set up an ambush. When the time came and the bandits really came, what greeted them was not the wide open door of the county warehouse, but a storm of sharp arrows and shiny swords and spears. Not a single person was left alive. They were all killed on the spot. Su Dimao had been in the stronghold and killed everyone who had seen him. Now that he silenced these bandits, who would still know who he was? Moreover, there were many people in the vicinity who had suffered at the hands of these bandits. Now that they knew that the new county magistrate was excellent in both literature and martial arts, his reputation quickly spread. Next, he relied on his own abilities to be transferred from this small county to a big county. He did well in the big county, had a good resume, and was promoted to magistrate. In the end, he even had the opportunity to meet with the emperor and become Huzhou's magistrate. And so, after a full 20 years, someone accidentally recognized him and was questioned by his political enemies. Finally, a case occurred. This case caused a stir at the time and reached all the way to the heavens. At that time, the Qing emperor had checked Su Dimao's resume and found that in his 25 years in office, he could be said to be honest and upright. He was a model among officials. Furthermore, hundreds of thousands of people and gentry under his rule had jointly written a petition to ask for mercy for him. In the end, the emperor sighed and praised him as virtuous and beheaded him. According to Qing law, killing an official and assuming his position should be punished with death by 1,000 cuts in 3 days. This kind of thing was not only in the Qing kingdom. Other countries also occasionally heard of it, and it had been around since ancient times. Otherwise, where did the killing an official and assuming his position in Qing law come from? The thoughts of the fake saints were probably the same as those bold secular people. Chapter 459. Some things that didn't belong to them had been held in their hands for a long time, and they had developed feelings for them. They regarded them as their own. And since it was their own, they naturally didn't want to see it destroyed by others. It was just that those officials held power, wealth, and a sense of achievement that was praised by others. And now these two false saints held the world in their hands. Su Yusong said these words, but Su Xing opened his eyes. He stared coldly at Su Yusong for a while and then looked at Li Yunxin. For the world. You're just a wandering soul. Do you really know what the world needs? Su Yusong also sneered. In short, what the world needs is not the immortals, who don't care about worldly affairs in your Daotong Kenzo. It's ridiculous that for tens of thousands of years, there have been thousands or even tens of thousands of powerful cultivators, but they only thought about their own cultivation and never paid attention to the common people of the world. Such a profound sect. The world doesn't need it. As for you, Humph, didn't you also escape and cultivate lust again? Our cultivation method doesn't require you to abandon your feelings and desires. Now you've also embarked on the same path. It's time for you to wake up and realize that you've done wrong in the past. He was originally interrogating Li Yunxin. But now, Su Xing only said one sentence, and Su Yusong's emotions became a little agitated. It could be seen that the former saints still left an unerasable mark in the hearts of these two wandering souls. In fact, it was very much like two children eager for recognition, thoughts like, I'm doing what you did in the past. Let's see if I can do better than you. But in essence, it was also because of another reason. The two wandering souls seemed to know that their saints weren't righteous. But that was the past and there was no way to change it. They could only make themselves do better than the previous saints in order to comfort themselves in their hearts and add more natural rationality to their current saints. And Su Xing seemed to know that he absolutely couldn't escape, so he gave up on Li Yunxin. So he talked more. He laughed again and his laughter was extremely contemptuous. Then you two wandering souls, what do you want to do? You want everyone to practice your method and then cultivate a bunch of monsters with remarkable abilities? You'll know what that kind of person is like just by looking at him. He shouted sternly, but his eyes were fixed on Li Yunxin. You have great ability, but you also have great desire. People in the secular world also have desires. But no matter how strong the desires of the people are, they also know that there is still Daotong, the Grotto Heaven, and the two sages. Su Xing's voice became high-pitched. Ever since Li Yunxin met him, he had never heard him speak so harshly and agitatedly. The pinnacle of worldly power is imperial power. Other than the Daotong Kenzo, there are also the imperial court, the people, and the longevity of the emperor. Why do you think no emperor has been able to pry into the way of heaven in the past 50,000 years? But according to your method, what kind of monster will you create? They had a long lifespan, boundless desires, and even greater power. Don't you know what kind of disaster these people will cause in the secular world? Don't you know what kind of existence demons are? Su Yusong's expression changed. He opened his mouth to speak, but Su Xing interrupted him again. He really shut his mouth. It was as if it was not Su Xing who was fixed here and being coerced, but himself. I know what you want to say. Su Xing looked at him sternly. Li Yunxin also looked at Su Yusong. Then he was surprised to find that Su Yusong's eyes flickered. Although it was only for a very short moment, he was still panicked by Su Xing's stern eyes and subconsciously looked away. But the next moment he remembered that he was now a sage and the person in front of him was just a prisoner. So he looked back. He indeed looked like a child facing a strict father. You want to say that cultivators also kill people, right? Su Xing stared at him. Cultivators burned down a city in the city of Wei and killed hundreds of thousands of people, right? But think about it carefully. Are they killing people for a specific purpose, or are they just killing people because they are in a bad mood? The daughter of the Golden Rock, by Yunxin, has been in the world for 1,000 years. How many people has this female demon killed? A few days ago, she killed people on a long street in the city of Little Rock. It was just a casual game for her. Before that, in these years, because she was unhappy, offended, and teased, how many cities did she slaughter? Don't you know? Today's Xianmen cultivators. Although they are not merciful, they still have the first commandment of, do not take the lives of mortals lightly. Just like in the dirty world, although the strong are respected, there are still some benevolence, righteousness, and morality on the surface, so that people will not be completely messed up. If according to your previous idea, cultivators will no longer be heartless and abandon their desires, and let them throw themselves into the mortal world, do you know how terrible the world will be? Is this what you said that people in the world want? Su Yusong suddenly shouted, Shut up. Old man. How many times have you said this? Don't you get tired of saying it? Even if the world is in chaos, it is better than the current lifeless and unrighteous state. Great destruction can lead to great success. Great destruction can lead to great success. Great destruction can lead to great success. He seemed to have gone crazy, completely losing his calm and steady demeanor. With a wave of his big sleeve, a bright arc of light hit Su Sheng's body with a buzz. For a moment the room was as bright as day. Even the sundries nearby were blown away by an invisible force, making a tinkling sound. Su Sheng's body was immediately entangled by electric snakes, and a burnt smell instantly spread. But it was only for a moment. Because Zhuomuxia immediately shouted, "Are you going to kill him now?" Only then did Su Yusong realize that he was not facing a cultivator, nor a big demon, but a reincarnation of a master of calligrapher. Although he could borrow supernatural powers, his ability was limited. So he quickly stopped. But it was too late. Su Sheng's face was beyond recognition, and his clothes were all destroyed. Large pieces of skin and flesh were rolled up on the surface of his body, and even some of the open wounds were still emitting green smoke. He breathed more than he breathed in, and it seemed that he would die soon. Zhuomuxia frowned and sighed, "Alas! You are now a sage. Why can't you bear his anger? Forget it, let's search his soul." After saying this, he touched his sleeve and took out a small sword. However, this small sword made Li Yunxin let out a soft gasp of surprise. He had seen many flying swords of cultivators. But in general, there was nothing too special about their appearance. Some were filled with the aura of treasures, while others were simple and unadorned. But one could tell that they were not ordinary but divine weapons. However, Zhuomuxia's sword was too strange. It was a rusted sword. The length of a palm and the thickness of a finger. The whole body was yellowish-brown and uneven. Not only was it rusted, but it seemed to have been rusted for a long time. If this kind of thing was thrown on the roadside in the market, no one would look at it except for children, but it was in the hands of the sword master. As soon as this sword was used, it combined the key of the sword spell. But Su Yusong immediately stopped her. "Wait! You can't kill him now." After saying this, he strode forward and pried open Su Sheng's mouth. With a golden light on his fingertips, he stuffed something into Su Sheng's mouth and hit his chin hard. It seemed that the thing fell into his stomach. Zhuomuxia frowned. "You gave him the resurrection pill. Do you think this is an ordinary pill? You will die after all." The name resurrection pill was really tacky. But the sword master said it in such a tone, which showed that it was very precious. It was really magical. As soon as the pill fell into his stomach, the wound on his body immediately healed. Li Yunxin was 5 steps away from him, but he could still feel the surging spiritual power. After another 3 or 4 breaths, Su Sheng took a deep breath. He was really pulled back from the edge of death by this pill. Su Yusong snorted and let go of his face. "It's not so easy to die." I want to hear what else he has to say. After escaping from Cloud Mountain for 1,000 years, does he have other knowledge? If he wants to die, I want him to die convincingly. After saying this, he was no longer in the mood to play the game of guessing with Li Yunxin. He turned to look at him with the remaining power. "As for you, now I only want to ask you one thing. If you answer, you will not die for the time being. If not, you will die on the spot." Li Yunxin took a deep breath. "You want to ask me how I became this dragon's son?" Su Yusong shouted, "Say it." Li Yunxin sighed, "Possession." After saying these 2 words, he looked up at Su Yusong. Su Yusong was still staring at him sternly, when Li Yunxin's heart skipped a beat, thinking that these 2 pseudo-sages might also not be able to hear the information related to the word, possession. Su Yusong said in a low voice, "How?" Li Yunxin's heart sank slightly. So he sighed again, "I was just lucky. I took Dragon 9's body." After saying this, he looked at Su Yusong's expression again. However, there was nothing unusual. He was still frowning with a straight face and wanted to continue listening. So he realized that it seemed that Lu Ling did not tell the details of that night in detail. He had already known that Lu Ling was taken away by the Freemasonry. Su Yusong said that they knew his arrangement in the city of Wei, which should be due to Lu Ling's contribution. She must have told the Freemasonry what had happened in the city of Wei, and then the Freemasonry followed the clues and found out his arrangement. After the city of Wei was burned down, he had chased and fought with the 9th young master who possessed hatred on the night when Shinryu came to Dongting. Along the way, almost all the runes he had engraved in the city were destroyed. He thought that no one in the world could understand them. But he underestimated the power of the Freemasonry. It seemed that some experts had deduced most of his means from the remaining traces. However, they knew all the arrangements, but there was one thing they couldn't know. To possess Dragon Sun, one must know the concept of emptiness first. In fact, if one dared to try, it was very easy to find out. But the problem was that those who had the ability to kill Dragon Sun and had the ability to try would not do this, to try with their lives. This was the key. Li Yunxin could say a lot of things, but if he said this, the Freemasonry who wanted to keep him alive might also want to kill him. Chapter 460. Although the Freemasons' wandering souls could also take over someone's body, it was fundamentally different from what Li Yunxin learned from Bai Yanjun. The Freemasons' possession was to take over a body. According to Li Yunxin's observation and what Su Sheng had said before, for example, the wandering soul who took over the bodies of the two sages could not fully exert the power of this body. It was just wearing a piece of clothing. However, when he took over Longjiu's body, he filled his soul into the emptiness of qi when on the basis of Longjiu's death. This was something similar to the position of a god. Only dragons had it in the whole world and they could be counted with 2 hands. After the possession he would have all the power that Long Sun should have, and he would have the strongest body in the world in the same realm. The 2 wandering souls of the Freemasons said something about the 6 desires reincarnation. Didn't they just want to have a body of their own? Once they knew this secret, how could they let him occupy the emptiness of qi when? So, he said take over Longjiu's body. And Su Yusong didn't seem to have any objection to this. This meant that for some reason, Lu Ling didn't tell the details of that night. After Li Yunxin killed Longjiu, the 9th young master's body disappeared, and there was no body for him to take over. So, they didn't ask in detail. Or did Lu Ling return a favor because Li Yunxin saved her from Dongting? But in any case, Li Yunxin wanted to continue. He paused slightly. At that time I had no way out. Longjiu pestered me, that demon couldn't be reasoned with. When he was happy he could tease me, but when he was angry he would hit me until I vomited blood. Being with him was like being with a tiger. I was always on the edge of life and death. Unfortunately, Lu Ling came to the city of Wei and forced me. Compared to now, the situation at that time was more dangerous. I couldn't reason with Longjiu. I can reason with Lu Ling, but I don't have the capital to do so. Thus I thought, rather than being killed by them, I might as well give it my all. Li Yunxin squinted his eyes, as if he was immersed in the pleasure of the success of his previous scheme. Of course I know the method of possession. There were such methods in the painting Tao, for example, turning the void into reality, drawing a body out of thin air. In the past, I used this method to create the body of the 3 flowers that I was sitting on. Therefore, I set up an array to ensure that my divine soul wouldn't be lost. He also provoked a fight between Longjiu and Lu Ling. The best-case scenario would be for Longjiu to die and for me to take over his body. The worst-case scenario is that Lu Ling dies and I take her body. Although she's a woman, her aptitude is excellent and she's a good choice. In the worst-case scenario, both of them would perish together, leaving nothing behind in this world. I can only possess a random person and wait for the right time. He paused and exhaled softly. But in the end it was the best result. Su Yusong and Zhuomuzhe kept staring at him without any change on their faces. Although Su Sheng was alive, he was still in a coma. Su Sheng didn't speak, so Su Yusong became a calm and steady person again. After Li Yunxin finished his words, Su Yusong paced around in silence, as if he was trying to figure out whether what he said was true or not. Or, the possession that Li Yunxin mentioned was actually something that wandering souls like them could do, so he was slightly disappointed. He was disappointed but also slightly suspicious. After a dozen breaths, Su Yusong suddenly turned to look at him. You possessed Longjiu, and with the power of wish, you achieved the true state with this demon's body. Then, the previous arrangement in the wild forest was even bigger. You must want to advance another level. This time, who are you going to possess? Li Yunxin answered without hesitation. Besides me, there's another Long Sun who is in the true state. 7 Long Suns are in the mysterious state, and they can also practice the way of demons. Any one of the 8 of them can do it. That's why I came up to Cloud Mountain, to make sure that you know the intentions of Long Sun, and that you can kill them. Su Yusong shouted again. Make sure? How can you be sure that we are going to kill Long Sun? Li Yunxin smiled. Of course I'm sure. And I believe that in your original plan, killing one or a few Long Sun occupied an important position. In the past, demons and Xianmen lived in harmony because they didn't want to start a full-scale war. Now that the full-scale war has begun, for the wandering souls of the Freemasonry, what other body could be better than the body of dragons? Since you like to live by possession, you will certainly not waste a great resource like Long Sun. You will certainly find a way to kill them and leave their bodies intact. Go through. Just like me in the past. And I just need to seize the opportunity and a little bit of courage. Su Yusong and Zhuomuzhe looked at each other. Then Zhuomuzhe said, So, How are you going to make sure that we can kill Long's son? Li Yunxin's face showed a little joy. Zhuomuji's question seemed to mean that they agreed with his statement to a certain extent. It also meant that things were developing in a good direction. So he immediately answered, dragons have a secret. The dragon soul is immortal. The soul of Dragon 9 who was killed by me before, was attached to Hatred's body. However, this kind of coexistence can't last long. As time passes, the guest will be assimilated and absorbed by the master. Therefore, the plan of Zither Lady and Hatred is actually similar to yours. In this war, they will consume as many demon soldiers and demon generals as possible, and then use the great formation they set up to turn those dead souls into the power of will, which they can enjoy alone. Dragons don't care about other demons and only regard them as sacrifices that can be sacrificed. Therefore, even if they are defeated in the war, they can still have the cultivation of the peak of the profound realm, and even kill a few brothers and sisters and concentrate the dragon soul on one or two people, and then it is possible to use the body of a demon to break through the realm of supreme indifference. You should be clear now. This is an unprecedented war. In fact, except for those low-level demons and cultivators of Shenmen who don't know the truth, the rest of the leaders among the forces, none of them really care about the outcome of this war. What they want is either the dead souls or the collapse of the Shenmen. This war between the Shenmen and the demons is actually just a piece of meat pie, the flesh and blood of those demons and cultivators. Those demons and cultivators used to treat the people of the secular world as pigs and dogs and blood food. Until now. How can they think that they have become blood food for others? After saying this, he looked at Su Yusong. I have told you everything. You should know that I am sincere. There are still 8 Long Sun, you can take over any one of them. But you should keep me. It only took me a few months to go from the peak of the transcendent stage to the advanced perfected stage. Whether you admit it or not, there is no one else in the society who can match me in wisdom and courage, except for the 2 of you. And you already have the body of the Supreme Sage and my dragon body is useless. In front of you, you also have 2 choices, kill me to ensure your safety and get rid of a considerable fighting force. Or, take out your courage and gamble whether I am sincere so that in the future war, whether with the Shenmen or with the elders, you have a better chance of winning. Su Yusong's expression still did not change, but he still remained silent. But Zhuomuji smiled, threw away the book in his hand and stood up. Courage? People like you do not need us to show any courage. After saying this, he took 3 steps and went out of the door. Li Yunxin only looked at Su Yusong. The fake sage was silent for a moment, and then shook his head. You are a heaven-sent genius. And also a double-edged sword. But, indeed, it is not enough for me to show any courage. Su Yusong looked at Li Yunxin. Guqin Jun planted a restriction on you and said, if you do not return in 10 days, you will die. In that case, your life will be handed over to the restriction. Su Yusong flicked his sleeve, and Su Sheng and the scattered objects and magic treasures on the table were all collected by him. Then he turned and went out. From tomorrow on, a day in Mount Shaoyun is a day in the world. You still have 12 days. If you can think of a way to break his restriction and live, I will let you live. If you can't think of a way, it will be your life. The world is dangerous and not everything is under your control. Now have a taste of what it feels like to be a victim of your own cleverness. Li Yunxin was stunned and then his eyes widened and he shouted in disbelief, you want me to die here? Are you crazy? Do you think you can fight against the Shenmen, the elders, and the demons with the wandering souls in your hands? You will regret it. But no one answered him. He wanted to rush out of the door and chase after them, but an invisible restriction stopped him in front of the door, and he could not take half a step out. Then, he saw a touch of white in the night sky in the distance. The day of Mount Shaoyun had begun. It also meant that the first day of the remaining 12 days had begun. It also meant that he only had 12 days left to live, if he really could not find a way out. Li Yunxin stared at the gradually brightening sky and shouted again, you will regret it. His voice echoed in the courtyard in front of the house and soon disappeared. Li Yunxin took a deep breath, and after a long time he slowly exhaled, and turned his head to look at the painting music in the cool palace on the white wall. As expected, the painting was covered with a layer of golden light, which kept flowing as if it was also sealed. The house had become a cage and he was imprisoned in it. He stood in front of the house for a long time, and then moved to try the other windows. The result was exactly the same as he expected. Su Yusong did not make any mistakes and the doors and windows were all unbreakable. Therefore Li Yunxin clenched her teeth and punched the window frame. She lowered her voice and squeezed out the words from between her teeth. Son of AB asterisk teeth. Why aren't you coming out to save me at this time? What the hell is he doing underground? Chapter 461. The first of the remaining 12 days was a difficult day for Li Yunxin. It seemed to be the same for those who weren't in the Cloud Mountains. For example, Zhao Xing, who was in the palace on the same day. This was a small palace compared to the spacious palaces of other emperors. But for Zhao Xing, the moment he walked into this palace was the happiest and most glorious moment of his life. This place was called Auspicious Spring Palace. It was one of the few temporary imperial residences of the Emperor of Yu and also the largest one. It was located by the Rong River and backed by Dangyang Mountain. Zhao Xing, who had raised his troops in the name of Prince Rong, settled down in the temporary imperial residence. At this time, the situation in Yu had somewhat stabilized. The Rong army and Yu army had divided the country equally. But the Rong army also needed to temporarily rest and reorganize their troops in order to finish the battle in one fell swoop. The Yu army also needed to lick their wounds and look forward to quelling the rebellion. Thus, the two sides temporarily reached a strange and tacit peace. Separated by the Rong River, they could almost hear the snoring of the other side's soldiers at night, but neither side took the initiative to attack. But at this critical moment, Prince Rong Zhao Xing had to make a difficult decision. What made him feel awkward was a person. This person was not the sorcerer sent by Mu Nanju to help, nor was he the sword palace that stood on the sidelines and did not help either side. But his most capable general, the current great commander of the three armies, Ing Juren. In fact, there were not many people in the three armies. There were only about 30,000 soldiers in total. Excluding the personal troops of the various feudal lords, and Prince Rong Zhao Sheng's Yulin royal guards, there were only about 20,000 soldiers left. And these 20,000 soldiers were only under the command of the great commander of the three armies. The number that great commander Ing Juren could really command was only about 4,000. About 1,000 people were his former subordinates. That day, Prince Rong Zhao Xing received a dream from the Wei River Dragon King in the magistrate's office, asking him to welcome two talented people, one civil and one military. The civil official was called Lu Gongzan. Zhao Xing did not come to welcome them. Not only did they not welcome him, but they also heard that Mount Jun, where the hermit Lu Gongzan lived in seclusion, had been bombarded by the heavenly thunder. They were very frightened. He wondered if his previous hesitation had angered the Dragon King and caused him to take away his military counselor. But at least a general came to greet him. It was this Ing Juren. When he came, he brought a team of more than 1,000 people. For Zhao Xing, who was just starting out, it was like sending charcoal in snowy weather. And these 1,000 or so people were not the small fries who were pulled out from the fields, randomly distributed sticks and rushed to the battlefield. Instead, they were elite soldiers who knew how to give commands and could form groups. Ing Juren had already told Li Yunxin about the identities of these so-called elite soldiers. In the past, they were bandits from the Black Stockade stronghold on Mount Chuyun in the Qing Kingdom. However, bandits had their principles and did not kill the innocent. In the eyes of the powerful Qing people, these bandits were not very capable. But when they came to the Yu Kingdom, they were like tigers among a flock of sheep. It must be known that the Yu Kingdom had been controlled by the Sword Palace for a long time. Now, suddenly, 1,000 tigers and wolves who had seen blood even if they had never killed before had suddenly come. How could they not break through like a hot knife through butter? Originally, the Sword Palace was a support. But, strangely, when the Rong army raised the banner of righteousness, the Sword Palace watched from the sidelines and no longer cared about other matters. Some said that the Yu Emperor had lost his way. Others said that the demon cultivators of the Sword Palace had been summoned by various demon kings to go to the Yi Kingdom. Thus, the Sword Palace was empty. There were all kinds of explanations, but the truth was, with the 1,000 elite soldiers that Ing Juren had brought as the core, Rong King Zhao Xing quickly gathered tens of thousands of soldiers. Everywhere they passed, there was no one who did not surrender at the sight of the wind. Occasionally there was resistance, but they were all swept away by Commander Ing. It could truly be said that they broke through like a hot knife through butter. Because of this contribution and because he was a talented general that the Dragon King had entrusted to him, Rong King Zhao Xing personally made him the commander of the three armies. The honeymoon-like days between the two of them only lasted for a little over a month. After Rong King entered the auspicious Spring Palace, conflicts and animosity arose. In Zhao Xing's opinion, the main responsibility for this matter lay with Ing Juren. This Commander Ing, perhaps because he was used to being a mountain bandit, was actually very unruly. However, he seemed to have the capital to be unruly. Rumor had it that he was somewhat famous on the Jianghu of the Qing kingdom and could be considered a great master in the martial world. When he came to the Yu kingdom to raise a matter, many martial artists of the Qing kingdom came to join him. This gave his reputation a boost. After that, the area around the Wei River in the Qing kingdom suffered one disaster after another. Many commoners lost their homes and lost their homes. Many bandits and heroes who used to live on those commoners could no longer stay in the Qing kingdom. Then they heard from their former comrades that after they went to the Yu kingdom to seek refuge with the former Black Knife, now Commander Rong King Ying, they were able to get some official positions. Every day they could eat and drink well, but their opponents were all weaklings. With such a good thing, how could those people who lived on the edge of a knife not be happy? Thus more and more people came. In the end, there were more than 500 people who came from the Qing kingdom. There were not enough official positions under the commander, so he organized some of the people who were not very skilled in martial arts into the Green Forest camp. When these Green Forest camp soldiers fought noisily, perhaps they could only be slaughtered when facing the Qing army, but they were facing the Yu army. Thus for a time they were in the limelight. In this way, Ingjuren not only had the 4,000 Black Knife army formed from the previous 1,000 soldiers, but also the Green Forest camp that had come from the Yu kingdom to assist him. This was already the largest force in the Rong army. Prince Rong had twice the number of Yulin forest guards in Zhao Xing's hands, but the problem was that if they actually fought, they would probably only be able to flee. Thus, when Zhao Xing realized that something was wrong, even when he spoke to Commander Ing, he sometimes had to use a negotiating tone. The treasured cauldron had yet to be in his hands, but the throne had already been taken by someone else. Even if it was a talent that Dragon King had entrusted to him, Zhao Xing could not tolerate it. What further intensified the conflict between the two of them was what happened yesterday. Yesterday, Prince Rong had ascended to the throne in Yichuan Palace to discuss one matter. Now that he had taken over half the country and stood as an equal with Emperor Yu, was the title of Prince Rong not enough to gather the hearts of the people? After all, in the beginning, their banner was to clean up the side of the emperor. Now that the country had been stabilized, it seemed that they should consider other things before planning for the future. In reality, everyone knew that Prince Rong wanted to become emperor. However, the matter of establishing a country for Rong had just been brought up when it was opposed by Commander Ing. The reason for his opposition was actually very legitimate. There were two main points. First, now that they were halfway through the important matters, morale was high. The most important thing to do was to flatten the Yu kingdom in one fell swoop after resting and reorganizing, attack Jingdo, and capture and kill Emperor Yu, completely cutting off the thoughts of certain people looking at both sides. After all, the Yu kingdom was a country and not some motley crew. Presently, their battle power was declining because their military had been lax for a long time. It was like an irrigation channel whose source had been cut off. However, the Yu kingdom still had many officials and military generals. Once they were given enough time, they would quickly adjust and receive an endless stream of soldiers to replenish their numbers. It was like opening up the water channel at the source again. Those dried-up canals were still canals and would quickly fill up again. However, the half of the country they occupied had gone through the fires of war. It was like digging a new canal. Many places were still not clear and government orders could not be carried out. Although the Rong army was good at fighting, it was only relative to the more lax Yu army. Once the Yu army reacted based on the hundreds of years of experience left behind by the predecessors of the Yu kingdom or received aid from other countries, then the Rong army situation would be very disadvantageous and could even ruin his great cause. Secondly, what they were doing now was actually very taboo. For thousands of years, which emperor did not want to expand their territory and become the ruler of the world? However, only the Qing kingdom 500 years ago succeeded in overthrowing it. It was because the previous dynasty's Emperor Yi had angered the goddess and was punished by the heavens. As for the others, even the most powerful Li kingdom did not dare to send troops to the surrounding small countries. This was because Daotong and Kenzo did not allow this. They wanted a long period of peace in the world and for the people to rest and build up their strength. What they were doing now was a great evil that disobeyed the immortals. Since, for some reason, there were no immortals interfering, they should take Jingdo in one go to avoid long nights of trouble. When the royal family of the Yu kingdom died, even if the immortals noticed what was happening here and wanted to interfere, what could they do? The new dynasty had already been established, and officials had been sent everywhere. As long as they did a decent job, presumably the immortals could only accept this result because they were not devoted to the royal family of a certain country, but to the people of the world. He raised these 2 points, and the officials in the hall all nodded in agreement, thinking that Commander Ing had thought it through thoroughly. For the sake of Prince Rong's future career, he should not proclaim himself emperor here. Instead, he should go to Jingdo to complete this matter. Zhao Xing also knew that Commander Ying's words made sense. However, the problem was not whether what he said made sense or not. The problem was, he openly opposed him in the hall, on such an important matter as the throne. Moreover, when he opposed him, the officials actually said, were they Prince Rong's officials or Ing Juren's officials? Thirdly, Ing Juren was just a person from Jianghu. How did he know so much about the world situation? Where did he come from? Therefore, Zhao Xing had to face a choice, to get rid of this Ing Juren before his power grew or to take a gamble. This Ing Juren was indeed loyal to his master, and everything he said was really for his sake. In fact, this choice was not too difficult. Anyone who wanted to sit firmly on the throne should choose the former. Compared to the interference of immortals, the general trend of the world, and all kinds of distant and ethereal threats, Ing Juren, who had elite troops in his hands, was the most terrifying and practical factor. So Prince Rong Zhao Xing sat in front of the table, drank a pot of wine, and waved his hand to summon the loyal servant beside him. The preparation lasted for about an hour. It should be, among all the coups in the world, the preparation was the fastest. In fact, there was nothing to prepare. The matter of killing Ing Juren had been in his mind for a few days, and he had long thought about what he should do if he wanted to kill Ing Juren. Zhao Xing thought that the people in Ing Juren's hands, the Qin Kingdom's Green Forest camp, were only there for glory, splendor, and wealth. What Ing Juren could give them he could also give. He could even give more. As for the strong soldiers from Black Stockade Fort in his hands, there were only 800 or 900 of them. He could call the Green Forest Army to fight with them, or he could use all the Yulin Royal Guards in his hands. 10,000 people could kill 1,000 people, could they not? The next thing to do was to place executioners behind the pillars in the hall and cover them with screens. He sent someone to call Ing Juren into the hall. After a few words, he threw a cup as a signal, and the executioners on both sides came out and immediately chopped him into meat paste. The leader was executed, and the rest of the people were not important. His position as emperor could be stabilized. After killing him, he could become emperor. Then he could use his remaining power to flatten the Yu kingdom. Thinking of this, he drank another cup of wine. When he looked up with drunken eyes, he found that the servant he sent out had returned. Behind him was a group of executioners, and there was a sorcerer beside him. He recognized the sorcerer. He was from Munanju. After they started the rebellion, people from Munanju suddenly came to the city and said that they could help him. Zhao Xing used to be a constable in Chengdu, and he knew that Munanju had a lot of power behind them, but he did not think that they would be of much help in this war. Until they sent sorcerers. He was from the Yu Kingdom and was used to seeing demons since he was young, so he was not unfamiliar with magical things. Therefore he was not very surprised to see the sorcerers, but he was surprised as to why they wanted to help him. The sorcerer only said that the master of Munanju had seen the tragedy of the Yu Kingdom for a long time, and wanted to do something. Now that Prince Rong was united, he felt that it was a good opportunity, so he came. Zhao Xing was naturally happy for such a good thing, and he was also very satisfied with the performance of the sorcerers. In fact, they did not use any magical powers. Instead, they used a more powerful and terrifying power than magical powers. That was information. Every time they went, they would report the number of soldiers stationed there, who the general was, how strong they were, where they were moving, and where they were gathering. Saying that he knew the Yu Kingdom like the back of his hand was not enough to describe Prince Rong's army. It should be, he knew them better than his own army. Therefore, every battle he went to was a great victory, like a heavenly general. Now that the sorcerer from Munanju came, he asked his servant. The servant said that when he went out to prepare for something important, the sorcerer also came. After asking carefully, he learned that the sorcerer also thought that the situation in the Rong army was not good. As the saying goes, two tigers cannot live on the same mountain. The conflict between Prince Rong and the general had affected the overall situation and the morale of the army. One must be eliminated to save the lives of the three armies and prepare for the upcoming decisive battle. Therefore he came today to solve this problem, but unexpectedly his thoughts coincided with Prince Rong's. Zhao Xing was overjoyed and told his plan in detail to the sorcerer. Before he planned to do this today, he was a little nervous and worried. Therefore he wanted to drink a little and think slowly. Unexpectedly, after drinking a little, his mind became cheerful and he asked someone to bring another pot of wine. When this pot of wine was finished, all the worries from before disappeared. He immediately decided to kill that Ing Juren today. Now that he was still in the mood to drink, he talked a lot. When he saw the sorcerer from Munanju, he felt a little heroic. Although his tongue was a little numb when he spoke, he did not know it. When he finished talking, the sorcerer only smiled and said that this matter was very promising. Zhao Xing saw the sorcerer's smile in his blurred vision due to the alcohol, and his heart felt even more at ease. Therefore he ordered the executioners to hide and sent his servant to summon Ing Juren, saying that he wanted to discuss crossing the Rhone River and going straight to the capital. Chapter 462. About a quarter of an hour had passed. Before he made up his mind, he was full of ambition. But now that he had started to wait, he felt that this quarter of an hour was extremely unbearable. Zhao Xing sat upright in front of the table with a saber by his hand. He reached out and tried again and again, feeling that he could get it with just a stretch of his hand. Today was a cloudy day. There were few candles in the hall, so the light was even dimmer. It seemed to be evening when he arrived at his table. On his left were servants and on his right were mages. Behind the screens on both sides of the hall, 40 axemen were lying in ambush. Thinking about this arrangement, Zhao Xing felt more at ease. Finally, he heard footsteps. But it wasn't one person but many people. Zhao Xing was surprised and straightened up to look at the servant next to him. The servant lowered his voice and said, "Didn't His Majesty order us to call all of our people? I asked them to come with Ing Juren. It'll be harder for him to escape." But he couldn't remember what he had said before. The alcohol made him dizzy and his attention became dull, but he was still focused. There was only one thought in his mind, to kill Ing Juren. So he squinted at the door of the hall. The first one to enter was undoubtedly Ing Juren. He always wore black clothes. After the uprising, he conquered Shaiyang County and found a black armor in the county warehouse. He loved it so much that he immediately put it in his pocket. He didn't even have time to count it. Thinking of this, Zhao Xing frowned again. After being executed, he took the armor and burned it. This Ing Juren, with a black saber at his waist, paused at the door for a moment. Zhao Xing held his breath, afraid that he would notice something was wrong. Unexpectedly, he reached out and brushed his body, then continued to move forward. He was a little relieved and looked behind him. Indeed, they were his people. Some were old brothers who had followed him since the uprising in Chengdu, and some were new followers. When this group of people entered the hall, the heavy door closed behind them. The light outside was immediately blocked and the hall became dark. From the door to Zhao Xing's table was more than 50 steps. At such a distance and in such a dark environment, he could not see Ing Juren's face clearly, so he could only count his steps. After they had walked more than 20 steps, he opened his mouth and said in a deep voice, "Great Commander Ing, do you know why I have summoned you here?" Ing Juren's footsteps stopped. Zhao Xing could see his figure standing upright in the darkness. After about 2 breaths' time, Ing Juren finally spoke, "Prince Rong summoned me, but only me." It could be seen that this matter was extremely secretive. A few days ago, I openly contradicted Prince Rong in front of the palace. Prince Rong will certainly be furious. Could it be that you called me here to denounce you? When Zhao Xing heard his words, he immediately thought of the man's usual arrogant and domineering manner. Even when he saw him, his face was always stiff and cold, and there was no respect in his words. It was as if he was not his king, but a bandit leader who was similar to him. Thus, the anger in his heart was ignited. He slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "How dare you? Since you know this, why don't you kneel down and beg for mercy? Maybe I can let you die in one piece." After listening to his words, the people behind Ing Juren understood what was going on. They had long thought that the two would not get along or that they would break up. But they never thought that things would happen so quickly. However, although it was fast, the team had already stood in place. Thus, after a slight pause, they immediately launched an attack. Some of them carefully listed Ing Juren's daily crimes, some urged him to quickly beg for mercy, and some pretended to press on the swords at their waists. But none of them dared to step forward and capture him. Although this Ing Juren often suffered losses in the hands of Li Yunxin, he was a true master among the secular people. Even if these people had not experienced his methods, they had heard of him. He could split a copper coin with a knife, jump 2 feet high with a knife, break pebbles with one hand, and so on. Until now, although he was standing alone, these people did not ask for trouble. Because they knew about this, Prince Rong must also know about this. Thus, some people secretly looked to both sides. Occasionally, they found an inconspicuous cold metal light behind the screen. Thus, they all knew what the situation was today, so they were not in a hurry. They only cursed and waited for Prince Rong to make a decision. But Ing Juren's reaction was very strange. He did not beg for mercy, nor did he sneer. He did not even say much. Instead, after a pause, he continued to walk forward. But his left hand was leaning on the hilt of his knife, just like how he used to patrol in front of the army. He was dressed in black and was getting closer and closer. Zhao Xing might have been afraid during normal times. But today he had drunk some wine and gained some courage. Secondly, he had a sorcerer and 40 axemen by his side. Therefore, not only was he not afraid, he sneered, "What, you think I can't do anything to you?" After saying this, he first lifted the wine pot and poured the remaining wine into the jade cup. Then he looked coldly at Ingjuren, picked up the jade cup and drank it in one gulp. As the hot wine entered his throat, Ingjuren was already 3 steps away from him. Zhao Xing sneered again and threw the jade cup in front of the table in front of him, just like the old masters in the Qingdu magistrate's office in the past. "Take him down." This voice was full of energy, deafening even the deaf. But the jade cup did not break. The floor of this hall was made of wood. Recently it had been raining for days, so it had already soaked in moisture and was not as strong as before. Moreover, the jade cup in his hand was actually a treasure. It was one of Emperor Yu's favorite cups in the auspicious Spring Palace. Although it was jade, it was as hard as a rock. In front of him was a kneeling table, which was not very high. Just now it was thrown out again. The jade cup rolled on the floor and stopped in front of Ingjuren's feet. For a moment the atmosphere was very awkward. Because what was even more awkward was that the axemen did not move. Zhao Xing was furious. He immediately stood up and picked up his knife, shouting, "Bastard! What are you waiting for? Take him down for me." But there was still no movement. At this moment, the voices of the officials in the hall gradually became softer. They saw Ingjuren stop in front of the jade cup. He stared at it for a while, then picked it up. Then, he turned his wrist and threw it on the floor. A crisp sound. The jade cup broke into pieces. The smashing of the cup was the signal. The screens on both sides of the hall were suddenly kicked over. 40 armored axemen with sharp blades in their hands rushed out. Zhao Xing sneered, "I think you," but halfway through his laughter, his smile froze on his face. Because those executioners didn't swarm towards Ingjuren. Instead they went straight for his trusted aides to kill. The main hall of the auspicious Spring Palace was very small, and it happened suddenly. Those officials were still thinking about the scene of Ingjuren's knives and axes, and the next moment, how could they imagine that they would be the ones to be killed? After a face-to-face encounter, half of them fell before they could say anything. The remaining half were busy pulling out their swords, some ran away with their hands over their heads, but it was too late. In just 3 or 4 breaths' time, no matter old or young, fat or skinny, they were all chopped to the ground and turned into corpses. For a moment, the smell of blood filled the air, and the blood that flowed out converged into small streams. Zhao Xing was dumbfounded and stood in front of the table for 2 breaths' time. At this moment, Ingjuren walked in front of him. Only then did Zhao Xing react and quickly pulled out his knife. But Ingjuren was faster than him. When his right hand touched the handle of the knife, the black knife that Ingjuren pulled out had already returned to the scabbard at his waist. Zhao Xing suddenly felt a chill on his neck and his mind was in chaos. The next moment, his head suddenly fell from his neck and rolled on the ground. This head that once belonged to Prince Rong fell to the ground, but it was still unsatisfied. Its eyes were wide open and its mouth opened. It was not clear where it got the energy from, but it spat out 3 words, "Such a fast knife." Only then did he lose his life. Ingjuren stretched out his hand and pulled Zhao Xing's body to the side. So the headless body tilted to the side, not letting the blood stain the military map on the table. Then he walked to the table and looked down at the map for a while, then straightened up and looked at the mage of Southernwood House. "Manager Wang, are you done?" The mage of Southernwood House smiled, "Let us comfort the soldiers. But I don't think there will be any changes. The Yulin Royal Guards in Zhao Xing's hands are just soldiers who eat rations. No matter who Prince Rong is, it will be the same for them. Sai, 2 tigers cannot live on the same mountain. Now that Zhao Xing has been removed, Commander Ing, oh, it should be Prince Rong, can continue the task that Dragon King entrusted to me." After listening to his words, Ingjuren frowned and thought for a while. "Li Yunxin, Dragon King entrusted me with this task. How come I didn't know about it, but you know about it?" The mage, or rather Manager Wang, whom Li Yunxin had met at Southernwood House in City of Wei and then at Southernwood House in Rong City, smiled again. "Not only do I know this, I also know that Hero Ing was subdued by Dragon King in an alley in City of Wei. Then he asked Hero Ing to bring people to City of Wei. Hero Ing is really bold, he really moved the people from Black Stockade Village to City of Wei. But even a person like Dragon King can make a mistake. City of Wei was destroyed. Fortunately, Dragon King made a trip to Rong City in country of Yu. Hero Ing, why do you think he made such a trip? Ing Juren frowned again and didn't say anything. The mage of Southern Wood House, Manager Wang, who had disguised himself, found him on a rainy night. At that time he and his people had just sought refuge with Zhao Sheng. When he saw him he said, "There's a message from Dragon King." At that time, Ing Juren was responsible for the livelihood of thousands of people in Black Stockade Village. In fact, he didn't trust anyone. Li Yunxin promised to help him settle down, but later he couldn't even protect himself and there was no news from him. Only a few strangers intercepted him halfway, saying, "Prince Rong has received the decree of Dragon King to invite heroes to join him in a grand undertaking." After many twists and turns he finally arrived at Rong City and started a muddled rebellion. It was already a muddled account. In the end, Manager Wang told him all about his past. Then he said that the owner of Southern Wood House was an ally of Dragon King, and now Dragon King was doing something that would shake the world. As for this side, he asked him to assist Hero Ing in accomplishing another grand undertaking and take care of each other with Dragon King. Chapter 463. Ing Juren only gave him a limited amount of trust. But shopkeeper Wang was not in a hurry, he only took care of him on the way. For any military information he would first report it to him and then to Zhao Sheng. The relationship between them gradually became closer, until today. He informed him of such a big event and prepared everything in advance. It turned out that the loyal servant, beside Zhao Sheng, was Mu Nanju's servant. And the 40 executioners called in by the servant were all elites of Ing Juren's Black Knife army. Zhao Sheng set up a trap to kill him, but in fact he had already fallen into Mu Nanju's trap. He probably did not even know how he died. This hero, who was born as a constable, was also a hero of his time. But it was a pity that he was born at the wrong time. It was a pity that he was born at the wrong time. After this, Ing Juren carefully looked at shopkeeper Wang from head to toe again. Then he said, "What do you mean? You asked me why Li Yunxin wanted to go to Chengdu. What do you mean? Does it have anything to do with me?" Shopkeeper Wang smiled. At this time the servant had already walked away from them, and ordered the executioners to collect the corpses. Shopkeeper Wang glanced at them and then looked at Ing Juren. "I know that Great Hero Ing doesn't have any clear concept of the Dragon King. In Great Hero Ying's heart, the Dragon King should be a person with magical powers. At the same time he makes promises but he doesn't always keep them. He only uses the people around him as chess pieces, and after using them he might throw them away. For example, asking Master Ing to move the people from the stronghold to Wei City. Great Hero Ing has made this decision after careful consideration and betting his life on it. But Dragon King didn't care about it at all. He left Master Ying's people on the road and disappeared. So Master Ing was quite dissatisfied with him. But he didn't have a good way out, and Li Yunxin was indeed not someone to be trifled with, so he couldn't say it out loud. Am I right? Ing Juren was silent for a while and then snorted, "Humph. In his eyes we are merely, How could a celestial being like him care about us? How would I dare to resent you?" Shopkeeper Wang laughed. "So there is indeed a grudge. But Hero Ing, please listen to me first." He rubbed his hands together, exhaled softly and looked at Ing Juren. That day the reason why the Dragon King came to Chengdu was because he encountered Chengdu's demon cultivator, Taoist Wolf. As for that Taoist Wolf, he's just a little demon. He hasn't even completed his human form. However, those who had dealt with the Dragon King before were either Profound Realm experts from the heaven or the Profound Realm demons in the lake. Those with lower cultivation were either humans or demons of the transcendent state. Any one of them would be a character capable of overseeing a region. Dragon King has seen so many people, but he suddenly became interested in a little demon like Taoist Wolf. Not only did you spare his life, you even followed him to Chengdu and stayed for a long time. In my eyes, this is already strange. But what's even weirder is, it's okay that the Dragon King is interested in demons. That Zhao Xing, even in the mortal world he isn't considered an outstanding person. However, the Dragon King displayed his abilities in front of him twice, telling him to mobilize troops. Why did he do all this? Shopkeeper Wang shook his head. At that time I was observing in secret, thinking about it repeatedly, but I couldn't guess his intentions. I only felt that he had nothing to do, so he wandered around randomly and stopped here to kill time. But that's not the case. At that time his situation wasn't optimistic and he had many things to do, but he spent a lot of effort here. Heroing, why do you think that is? Ingjuren's brows were still furrowed. He blinked his eyes, wanting to say something but stopped. After a moment of silence, he shook his head. Impossible. Shopkeeper Wang chuckled. What's impossible? Ingjuren was silent for 3 breaths, then said, You want to say that he stayed in Chengdu for a long time for no reason, but actually, he wanted to find a place for me in Lugongzan to settle down. This is impossible. Shopkeeper Wang laughed again. It's just a simple thought, so naturally it's impossible. But let me ask Heroing, in the past you gathered a lot of people in the black stronghold of Mount Chuyun. Was it just because you pitied them and wanted to feed them? Ingjuren was stunned. Of course. But Shopkeeper Wang interrupted him, but there are so many pitiful people in the world. Are there no more poor people in the counties near Mount Chuyun? Why didn't Heroing bring them to Mount Chuyun? Ingjuren frowned. Mount Chuyun is barren. It's not easy to maintain a stronghold of 1,000 people. If he brought more people, I'm afraid the old and weak people in the stronghold would starve to death. Moreover, even if there were more people to eat, those young and strong people wouldn't be able to feed them. What do you mean by this? Shopkeeper Wang smiled. Look, when Heroing does something he will think about it, whether it's good for him to do it. If it's good for others but he will be buried in it, smart people won't do it. If Heroing can think this way, won't Dragon King think the same way? Just like Heroing wouldn't specifically take in the old and weak people, Dragon King wouldn't come here just to find a place for you to go. It must be that while planning for you he can also do something for himself. Just like when Heroing takes in those young people into the stronghold, he hopes they can become soldiers to strengthen the stronghold. In fact, it's the same thing. If I put it this way, Heroing might understand Dragon King and think it's possible? Ingjuren's brows furrowed even tighter. After thinking for a while, he said in a low voice, Even so. After saying this, he stopped. After 2 or 3 breaths, he let out a long breath and looked up at Shopkeeper Wang. Really? Shopkeeper Wang smiled sincerely. Of course. Alas. This time, Ingjuren sighed again. But it wasn't sorrow in his breath but something else. It was a slight sense of relief. Forget it. Then tell me, what does Dragon King want us to do next? How did you know? Shopkeeper Wang smiled again. Maybe it was his old professional habit, but he loved to smile. However, his smile was not irritating but rather relaxing. He smiled and said, Dragon King stayed in Chengdu for many days to find a place for you to go. The other is what we need to do now, conquer the world. I just said that you should be Prince Rong. I think Dragon King asked you to come here for the same reason. Heroing thought about it. The Dragon King of Wei River's capable general. Why did he become the commander of a mere constable? Could it be that this was arranged by him? Does he look like this kind of person, who would make himself lose face? At first he was called Zhao Sheng because he was from Yu and had connections in Chengdu. It was easy for such a person to gain many followers when he did things. If a foreigner came to rebel, people would not follow him but they would share the same hatred. But now that Rong Jun is powerful, he is no longer relying on brotherly feelings to maintain the team at the beginning of the rebellion. What he relies on now is power and glory. Heroing already has prestige, so it's reasonable for him to be independent now. No one will object. And what Dragon King wants Heroing to do is probably the same as what he did in the city of Wei. Heroing, think about it. When he subdued you in the alley, what was the situation in the city of Wei? This time, Ingjuren didn't think too long. He let out a sigh. I remember. At that time, there was a dragon cult in the city of Wei. The cult master was him and he gathered many believers. Shopkeeper Wang said in a low voice, Exactly. You are not a cultivator, so I can't tell you in detail what is the use of doing this. But for example, the immortals in the temples are worshipped by people. People like Dragon King will also benefit from being worshipped. At that time there was a dragon cult in the city of Wei. And now, if you get the world of Yu or even more territory in the future when the world is in chaos, just like the Sword Palace in Yu, it's not difficult to establish a national cult and let many people worship the Wei River Dragon King. This is what he wants you to do. The reason why he chose you is that there used to be a sword palace in Yu which is similar to a national cult. The people of Yu have long been used to this custom, so it won't be too difficult for them to accept other things. Hearing this, Ingjuren was stunned at first and then became silent. He looked a little absent-minded. Because he used to be just a master. Later, he joined the Rong army in Yu and became the commander of the Rong army. This title was impressive, but in fact he didn't feel much. Firstly, the number of soldiers in the Rong army was small, and secondly, many of them were incomplete. They looked no different from farmers. Thirdly, the time was still very short. He didn't have enough time to adapt to the change from the master to the commander. Many changes were obvious in the eyes of outsiders. But it was hard for the people involved to have a clear experience. But now, he who hadn't completely adapted to the role of commander, was told to become Prince Rong. To become Prince Rong, he knew what he had to do, he just had to continue doing what he was doing now. Raise troops, fight and win. Kill all the way to the capital. But he still hadn't thought about what to do when he reached the capital. Zhao Xing thought he had disloyal intentions. But in fact, until he killed Zhao Xing today, he didn't have such thoughts. Even when he thought about what to do after attacking the capital, he would feel slightly relieved because, at that time, it would be Zhao Xing's business. But after that, he decided that he needed to do it. He had never had the experience of rebelling, and thinking of this already made him feel a little nervous. But this wasn't the end. Manager Wang actually said something like, obtaining a bigger territory, could it be that obtaining you was not enough and he still had to kill his way out? Thinking of this, he grasped the hilt of his saber. A bigger territory. Manager Wang. You told me before that we should act as soon as possible, and that we should do it in one go. Because we were worried that the immortals of Daotong and Kenzo would interfere. Then the so-called bigger territory. Manager Wang laughed. Don't tell me you still haven't realized? Troubled times have already come. I mean really troubled times. Troubled times where demons and heroes rise together. Troubled times where hundreds of thousands, millions or even tens of millions of people kill each other. Troubled times where blood flows and corpses are strewn everywhere, and heaven and earth are about to be cut apart. Chapter 464. Shopkeeper Wang was still smiling, but his smile had turned cold, and his tone had turned sharp. It was the first time Ying Juren had seen him like this. He subconsciously gripped the hilt of his knife again. What do you mean? Shopkeeper Wang sighed and paused for a moment. He paused as if he was thinking about where to start. But after thinking for a while, he only said, to talk about this, mastering needs to know something else first. For example, who is the real ruler of this world? Is it the emperors of the human world, or the cultivators of Daotong and Kenzo? Ying Juren thought for a moment. I don't know much about the gods. But since you asked and I have seen the methods of the immortals, it should be the immortals. Shopkeeper Wang chuckled. Hey, you are only half right. For example, in the Qing kingdom, the rulers on the surface are the government and the court. But in the dark, there are guilds, gangs, and strongholds. The government and the court are like the immortals of Xianmen. And on the other side, mastering should know that there are demons. Demons are very rare for ordinary people, but they are very common. Hero Ying should be able to understand this. Ying Juren naturally knew this. He had stayed in Li Yunxing's Dragon Palace and Ziwei Palace on Mount June. He had seen demons with his own eyes. That Li Yunxing called himself the Wei River Dragon King. Wasn't he also a demon? It seemed that he was a famous demon. He thought of the Dragon King Temple, the Mountain God Temple, the Earth God Temple, and all kinds of temples he had seen in the past. He used to think that what people worshipped were real gods. But these days, after seeing more and knowing more, he realized they had been worshipping demons. There were so many fiendish demons hiding among the humans. Thinking of this, he felt a slight chill. He didn't know where the fear in his heart came from, and he couldn't tell what it was. Seeing him like this, Shopkeeper Wang nodded and continued, Master Ying, you should know that the real rulers of the world are cultivators and demons. The two have been balancing each other for tens of thousands of years. Demons are cruel by nature, and if no one restrains them, they will bring chaos to the world. And the Xianmen have the responsibility of shepherding the people, so they don't dare to be too arrogant to avoid an all-out war. Hero Ying, you should also know that when the commoners of the mortal world worship the incarnation of a fiendish demon, they can provide the fiendish demon with incense and power of will. For example, your Wei River Dragon King, the more people worshipped him, the more powerful his demon power is. However, in the previous situation of mutual checks and balances, although the great demons could perform miracles to confuse the people, once they did so, they would face the crazy encirclement of the cultivators of the celestial sect. As a result, the great fiendish demons mostly live in seclusion deep in the mountains or in the city. Instead, it's the lesser demons that cultivators don't think much of that frequently appear. These little demons that are showing their divinity will also do some small good deeds, so the Taoist sect of Xian will turn a blind eye to them. Hearing this, Ying Juren was stunned. Then Li Yunxin is a demon? Shopkeeper Wang laughed. Ha! Your Wei River Dragon King is a demon among the demons. When I said demons hide, I was talking about ordinary demons. Your Dragon King is the royal family of demons. Dragons control 7 parts of the world's water. The Shinryu King that people worship refers to as the dragons. Ingju Ran let out another, ah, the expression on his face becoming slightly complicated. Actually, he couldn't tell if it was gratification or jealousy, or if it was a lot of other emotions that were tangled together. He thought for a while, then asked, then, what happened? Shopkeeper Wang took a deep breath and looked up. Actually, there was only a dark dome above him. He couldn't see anything. But his gaze seemed to pass through the roof of the palace, to see the outside world, to see the distant future. Then, it will be the unprecedented chaotic era that I told you about. Everything will change. The Shenmen will fall apart and demons will appear in the world. At that time, many demons that were afraid of Daodong's power and went into seclusion will want to obtain more power of faith. And the power of faith is divided into 2 kinds. One is people's faith, worship from the bottom of their hearts, from respect and love. This kind is very rare. The demons have to satisfy them, please them, and guide them. No matter who it is, it's a very troublesome thing. The other kind is, it's very simple. It's fear. It's even easier to do. The demons will appear and start a massacre. Their fierce name will quickly spread and they will quickly obtain a lot of power of faith. Once the chaos comes, the demons will choose the latter. When he said this, his voice became slightly lower. As if he could see the terrible and miserable scene of the future, every word he said was very heavy. The demons will fight to be the first to build their own demon kingdom. They don't need an emperor, they themselves will be the emperor and gods of the mortal world. They will carry out a terrifying and bloody rule, squeezing everyone's flesh and spirit as much as possible. This situation will continue for a long time. Until more and more mortals die and the world becomes more and more withered. The demons will realize that what they are doing is no different from killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. The cultivators among the mortals can use their own power to cultivate. If the demons want to grow, they have to rely on mortals. And once the number of mortals drops to a certain level, they will find it hard to advance, and will turn to killing each other to fight for resources. It's also at this time that they will realize that the methods of the Shenmen in the past, the methods now, are the best. Shopkeeper Wang looked at Ingjuren meaningfully. There is a mortal as the emperor, becoming the demon's agent in the mortal world. And the demons will protect the people for this emperor, letting them live and work in peace and contentment. For this, the people will be grateful to the emperor, worship the guardian, and the number will also increase. This is a good cycle that can be repeated over and over again. The demons will eventually realize this, but by that time a long time will have passed. And, if before everything starts, someone has already started to do this, think about it. At that time, how terrible an advantage will he have? Ingjuren opened his mouth, feeling that his lips were a little dry. Even without Shopkeeper Wang's gaze, he felt that he knew what Li Yunxin wanted him to do. Li Yunxin is a big demon, he wants me to become the agent. This thought made Ingjuren frown. If the idea of becoming an emperor was too far-fetched for him, then this only made him feel that it was ridiculous. Right now, they were by the Rhone River. Inside the palace. There were many powerful empires in the world, with millions and tens of millions of elite soldiers, and everywhere there were Shenmen garrisons and immortals with profound cultivation. All of this could be seen and touched, but this wizard Mu Nanju in front of him described to him a terrible and ferocious scene that happened in the future. He could not imagine it at all. However, Shopkeeper Wang's tone was so firm, his expression so solemn, it was hard for him to think that this person was exaggerating or trying to scare him. Because of this strange contradictory feeling, Ingjuren took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Enough. Black Blade Ingjuren Humph will never be a puppet. My blade. I only do what I want to do." After saying this, he paused and frowned. "How do you know these things? You said you are from Mu Nanju. Why do you care so much about Li Yunxin? You told me before that people always have their own selfish motives, so what do you want?" Shopkeeper Wang smiled. "We are allies with the Dragon King. When I was in Chengdu, I met the Dragon King, we got along very well. Right now, the Dragon King is on Mount Yunshan and is about to do something big, so it is not convenient for him to contact you. Therefore we will convey the message on his behalf. As for what we want," Shopkeeper Wang smiled, "we just want a better world. Hero Ing is now slowly beginning to understand the true face of this world. When Hero Ing knows more, he will have the same thoughts as us. In a better world, everyone will benefit. It is done over there. After saying this, he pointed to the hall. The bloodstains in the hall had been cleaned up, and the warriors stood on two sides. A servant stood in front of the door and turned to look at the two of them. Shopkeeper Wang approached Ingjuren. Prince Rong, it is your job now. Ingjuren held the hilt of his blade tightly, his brows knitted together. After thinking for almost a quarter of an hour, he seemed to have finally made up his mind. Open the door. The servant glanced at Shopkeeper Wang again and opened the hall door. The light from outside shone in and Ingjuren took a step forward. Jinghua. Qin Hall. Qin Hall had always been the study of the Qing Emperor. But after the Qing Emperor ascended the throne, he did not like to go to the back palace and often spent the night in Qin Hall. Now Qin Hall was the study of the Emperor, and also the Emperor's bedchamber. In the past few hundred years, the number of people serving in Qin Hall was around 60, but this time the number had expanded to 200. It was just past 5 in the morning. Because it was already late autumn, the sky was not yet bright. Usually the Emperor would be up at this time. He would be washing up and changing clothes. In another hour there would be a meal and then court. Privately, it was said that the current emperor was the most diligent ruler in the world. Since he ascended the throne at the age of 28, he had not been lazy for a single day. The emperor was diligent, so the people serving him had to be even more diligent. Usually at this time there were people coming and going near Qin Hall. Could be said to be an endless stream. Some were the emperor's attendants, and others were the attendants of the concubines who were spending the night there. Lanterns of all sizes were lit. People came and went in an orderly fashion. It looked like a portrayal of the Qing kingdom's prosperity, people's strength and peace. However, on this late autumn morning, it was so quiet in front of Qin Hall that one could hear a pin drop to the ground. It was not that there was no one. On the contrary, all of the attendants in Qin Hall, 200 of them, knelt from the Qing Emperor's bedchamber all the way to the white jade square in front of the hall. They all lowered their bodies, lowered their heads and slowed their breathing. It was as if any heavy breathing would bring disaster. The cause was, after the Qing Emperor woke up early, he suddenly sat by the bed in a daze and didn't speak. At this point it had already been almost an hour. Chapter 465. The Emperor's closest attendant, Eunuch Hua, knelt at the very front. Similarly, he did not dare raise his head. His eyes were only fixed on the Qing Emperor's feet. His feet were bare, and when he stepped on the thick and soft lamb skin in front of the couch, he sank halfway into it. Eunuch Hua stared at the foot and thought to himself, it's late autumn and the weather is dry. But the earth dragons in the palace were burning fiercely. Perhaps the emperor was on fire. Now that there was a fire and he was stepping on the lamb skin barefoot, it was not good for his health. When the emperor's mood improved, he would first instruct the kitchen to prepare a bowl of flowering jade porridge. He was not like the nearly 200 people behind him, nervously guessing why the Qing Emperor had suddenly fallen silent. Because this wasn't the first time he had been like this. Ever since Daoist Qing Shui left the capital. It was just that this time it was seen by everyone. Furthermore, the emperor was a benevolent person and would never vent his anger on the people around him for no reason. But it seemed that because of this time he suddenly seemed to be throwing a tantrum, almost scaring everyone to death. Kneeling beside the emperor was concubine Ming, who had served him last night. Concubine Ming's surname was Lu, and her ancestor was actually a distant relative of the emperor. The Qing emperor did not have many concubines. There were no more than 8 famous people. 1 empress, 1 imperial concubine, and 6 imperial concubines. Among the 8, concubine Ming was the only one favored by the emperor. Although she had not given birth to a child in the past 6 years, the emperor's favor had not decreased. Almost every 2 or 3 days she would come to serve him in bed, and no one could steal her limelight. But in fact, concubine Ming was a gentle and obedient person who didn't speak much. She was inferior to the other 7 in terms of both knowledge and appearance. No one could understand why she was so favored. However, Eunuch Hua was aware of this. Concubine Ming knelt beside the emperor. Eunuch Hua raised his eyes slightly and could see the side of concubine Ming's face. At this moment she did not have the time to dress up. Her beautiful black hair hung on the right side of her body. The left side of her neck and earlobes were all exposed to Eunuch Hua's gaze. Therefore he could see a strand of curly hair behind concubine Ming's ear. It looked like a small hook. The people of Clearwater had them too. Another quarter of an hour passed. Then the Qing Emperor's hand finally moved. It had been resting on his lap with his head slightly lowered in deep thought. At this moment he raised his right hand and picked up something from his knee. The emperor had moved. The others did not dare to look, but concubine Ming and eunuch Hua did. They finally saw what it was. It was a white hair. The emperor's undergarments were white, and his white hair fell on his knees. Naturally they couldn't see him clearly. Now that he saw this thing he was stunned for a moment. Just because of this thing, he sat quietly for almost an hour? The Qing emperor twirled the white hair between his fingers and looked at it silently for a while. Suddenly he sighed gently. I am old. The emperor was 35 years old this year. He was actually in the prime of his life. He also practiced some body-strengthening techniques passed down by immortals and ate well. A person in his mid-20s in the marketplace would only look like the Qing emperor. But everyone was afraid of getting old, especially the emperor. Now that he had finally seen the first strand of his hair turn white, he could only sigh with emotion. Hearing the Qing emperor's words, everyone let out a breath. So it was because of this. Eunuch Hua and concubine Ming planned to say something. Whether it was something like, it's all because the emperor overworks himself. It's fine as long as he takes good care of himself, or something like, at the emperor's age how can he be considered old? Some children in their teens have white hair. They could all make the Qing emperor feel at ease. Just as the words reached their mouths, their expressions suddenly changed. 2 drops of tears suddenly fell from the Qing emperor's eyes. Since the first time the current emperor cried when he was born, no one had ever seen him cry. Even if the previous emperor died. Eunuch Hua only froze for a moment before he quickly waved his hand behind him. The people behind him understood and rose in succession. Fearfully lowering their heads and bowing their backs, they quickly retreated out of the hall and closed the door. Concubine Ming was also stunned. She looked at eunuch Hua as if asking for help. The old chamberlain thought for a moment and also gave her a meaningful glance. Concubine Ming hesitated for a moment. Gritting her teeth, she tentatively placed her hand on the Qing emperor's leg. The Qing emperor didn't look at her, but 2 more drops of tears fell. I am already old. Concubine Ming withdrew her hand. She also rose and also slowly left the hall. Inside the room there was only a master and a servant. After a dozen breaths, the Qing emperor stood. He tossed aside his white hair and walked around the room with his hands behind his back. Then he faced the window with his back to eunuch Hua and asked, Say, how much longer do you think I can live? Normally, a chamberlain would say that the emperor would live for 1,000 years. Eunuch Hua thought for a moment and also stood up. As he took out a large cloak, he walked behind the Qing emperor and draped it over him. In a quiet voice he said, Your Majesty is 35 this year. If there are no changes you should have 30 more years. If heaven is watching, perhaps there are 40 or 50 more. But any more would not be the work of man. The Qing emperor's tears fell again. However, his voice was as neutral and calm as usual. I have all the rare treasures in the country, yet I can only watch myself grow old like a normal person. I cannot accept this. Eunuch Hua was speechless. In reality he knew why the emperor was crying. In the past he had also known, but he did not think it would reach such a stage. It was because of Qingshui Man. Qingshui Man had lived for many years. In the foreseeable future she would live for many more years. But, when she left the capital, she told the emperor that she was going to do one thing and would never see him again. Perhaps Qingshui Man's one thing was truly just one thing for her, such as a normal person visiting friends and family or taking the imperial examinations. She would be gone for months, a year. But for Daoist Qingshui, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years in fact could be considered as a snap of the fingers. But the emperor could not wait until then. Separation in life and death were both very cruel, but there was another thing that was even crueler. You could love someone with all your heart and life, but to her, you were just a fleeting passerby. He was silent. After a while, he heard the emperor ask again, Where is Fu Bonan? Eunuch Hua thought for a bit and then said in a low voice, Your Majesty, news came last night. Sir Fu has died in office. The Qing emperor abruptly turned his head. His eyes were still wet, but his brows were tightly furrowed. What did you say? Sir Fu was ordered by Your Majesty to investigate the matter of the ghost emperor, Eunuch Hua said calmly in a low voice. He had just arrived at our camp when an immortal from the Kenzo also went. Without any explanation he wanted to kill Ding Min, Su Mao and the other witnesses. He also killed Sir Fu earlier. After that, Li Yunxin appeared in the camp and fought a great battle with another Kenzo master, Jin Guangzi. The two of them were powerful and affected everything within a radius of several li. Not only did Sir Fu die in the line of duty, but thousands of soldiers in our camp also died. This matter has gradually spread throughout the Allied army. By tomorrow at the latest, I think all the emperors will know of this matter. The Qing emperor gritted his teeth. After a moment of silence, he said, "What do you think?" "In my opinion," Eunuch Hua said with a heavy expression, "we have heard of the matter of the ghost emperor before. But we only thought it was a rumor spread by ignorant commoners. Now that our soldiers have personally seen it, the credibility is high. After that, an immortal from the Xianmen went to our camp to kill people. Your Majesty, right now the Xianmen are in need of people. Unless something extraordinary happens, there is no reason for them to kill their allies. Yet they did so. It means they don't want this matter to spread. It also means it should be true." The Qing emperor's breathing sped up slightly. He was silent for a moment and then said in a low voice, "You also believe it to be true?" He then took a deep breath. Li Yunxin again. What happened after that? What was the result of the battle between Li Yunxin and Jin Guangxi? Apparently Jin Guangxi was killed. Li Yunxin was taken to Yunshan. Good kill. The Qing emperor snorted. This cultivator is too arrogant. The battle is imminent. He ran to my camp to kill people. His expression quickly dimmed again. It seemed to be because of the name, Li Yunxin. The emperor knew about Li Yunxin. Before Taoish Qingshui left, he had said he wanted to see how far Li Yunxin could go. It was also from then on that the emperor began to pay special attention to this person. Only now did he realize that this person was powerful to this extent. He dared to kill people outside the camps of Daotong and Kenzo. Wasn't Jin Guangxi a cultivator of the true realm? The emperor quickly let out a breath. He had once asked to see a cultivator at the pinnacle of the true realm but couldn't. What kind of existence was a cultivator of the true realm and a sect leader? In the hearts of the people she must be like a god. Li Yunxin killed her? The emperor tried to think of the magnificent and terrifying scene. But he couldn't think of it. Taoish Qingshui left for this young man. The emperor's heart clenched. He closed his eyes and let out a light breath. Eunuch Hua stayed silent with him. It wasn't until the sky outside the window gradually brightened that the Qing emperor opened his eyes again. How is Zhao Zheng? Zhao Zheng, the heavenly official of the Ministry of Personnel, could be considered a veteran of 2 dynasties. There had always been a rebellious saying in the Qing kingdom. It said that the world now belonged to the Zhao family. He was referring to the Zhao clan, which was led by Zhao Zheng and his subordinates. The group of civil officials formed by these people held the majority of the power in the court, and could almost stand up to the emperor. Eunuch Hua said, "Your servant has made the necessary arrangements." The number of officials who were dissatisfied with Zhao Zheng's domineering ways was actually more than one could imagine. In the past, it was only because His Majesty did not want to care about these things that he could only endure. Now that His Majesty wanted to make a move, everyone would naturally respond to his call. Zhao Zheng, a clown. Your Majesty, give the order immediately. Tomorrow this old servant will present his head to you. This will ensure the stability of the court. The Qing emperor thought for a moment and suddenly said, "Have the crown prince do this." Eunuch Hua was stunned. "Crown prince? Your Majesty, I am already 18, the Qing emperor said calmly. When I was 18 I was already handling government affairs for the previous emperor. Now, it was time for him to train. If he did well, I can rest assured in handing this world to him. He is tolerant and honest. He will be a good emperor. At least, the Qing emperor sighed gently. He will not have another Taoish Qingshui by his side. Eunuch Hua thought through the Qing emperor's words and suddenly paused. Your Majesty, my fate is up to me, not the heavens. I have already made up my mind. The Qing emperor looked darkly at the similarly dark sky outside the window. A mortal emperor is still immortal. If he cannot live forever, what is the difference between the remaining 30 years of life and the remaining 3 days of life? Chapter 466. It was now the 4th day since Li Yunxin had been imprisoned on the floating mountain. The sky was as bright as ever, like the sun in summer. Now he had rolled up the curtains and doors and was lying on a bamboo couch by the door. From this angle he could see the entire courtyard. The courtyard was very wide and in fact it was like a small garden. The outermost edge was surrounded by many lush locust trees, forming a wall of trees. The locust trees here were the thickest ones Li Yunxin had ever seen. Even a branch that stuck out was as thick as a person's arms. Today the locust flowers were blooming out of season, and the fragrance of the flowers was strong and filled the air. Further inside was a large expanse of green grass, dotted with scattered stones. Li Yunxin liked this kind of scenery, and it seemed that the previous owner also liked it. But it was obviously not the aesthetic of this world. In fact, many gardens on the floating mountain were all about winding paths, hazy and reserved. Such a large expanse of unbridled green, such a strong and brilliant fragrance, were in fact not meant for humans. Further inside the grass was the flowing water. The water was clear and shallow, with pebbles, grass and faintly discernible fish. This was something that the people of this world liked, and it was a beautiful combination here. Then further inside was the wooden platform outside the study. If Li Yunxin could walk out, it would be best to set the bamboo couch on the wooden platform. But now Li Yunxin's mind was not on these scenery. He was lying down idly, but he had nothing to do. In fact, he wanted to do a lot of things, but he couldn't go out. So he thought, what the hell is Black Bai Yanjun up to? He had another purpose in coming to the cloudy mountain. That was, if one day he really reached a desperate situation and his life was really over, what would Black Bai Yanjun do? Li Yunxin also wanted to figure out another problem. That was, whether the two of them suddenly went into seclusion on purpose, but were still observing in secret, or whether they really had no choice but to ignore the affairs of the living world. The difference between the two was huge, and it would have a huge impact on many of the things he would do next. He had to get to the bottom of this problem before he could come up with other ideas. Before he went to Evil King's Pitfall Mountain, he had always thought that Black Bai Yanjun might just be helping him out for fun, and he had the attitude of, let's see how far I can go. But after that time, Bai Yanjun brought him to a forbidden room in the dark Azura Hall. They also said some strange things, as if they were saying that Li Yunxin was the person they had chosen, and there had been such a person before. From this point on, Li Yunxin knew that he was not a chess piece that could be abandoned at any time to Black Bai Yanjun. But now, it had been a long time since he had seen them. In the past, whenever Li Yunxin was in danger, Bai Yanjun would appear. They would either provide some information or make some requests. But this time, regardless of whether it was Li Yunxin being struck by lightning at Mount Jun, being surrounded in Changji Town, going to Hatred's Palace, going to the Qing Army's camp, and now being imprisoned by a fake saint, Bai Yanjun had never appeared again. If they had felt that the situation was not dangerous before and that Li Yunxin had left some leeway, then what about this time? Perhaps this meant that the first possibility had been erased. Black Bai Yanjun was not actively avoiding the world. They had a compelling reason for being unable to come to this world. Perhaps it was a hasty judgment to make such a judgment based on the fact that Li Yunxin was about to die, but they did not show themselves. But at least one thing was certain. This time he truly had to rely on himself. He had placed himself in an extremely dangerous situation and finally confirmed this conclusion. Thus, Li Yunxin sighed and closed his eyes again. He had nothing else to do these days, so he could only do one thing: cultivation. He had never been so focused on cultivation without any distractions. Although he had handed over many of his belongings with his genius mind, he had already memorized most of the contents when he was flipping through those books. Now he used the memories in his heart to organize the many scattered pieces and could cultivate for a period of time. Although he still lacked many things, it was no longer the situation of building castles in the air in the past. Now he was laying the foundation. Although this foundation could not be completely laid in a short time, the rest could be added later. Actually, it would be good if he could obtain the martial methods in the hands of the painting Taoist priests on Yunshan that Su Sheng spoke of. Thinking of this, he opened his eyes slightly. Sunlight seeped in, and for a moment his vision became a bit dizzy. Li Yunxin's gaze wandered back and forth among the dense locust trees on the outskirts. Very quickly he found what he was looking for. It was a ribbon hanging from one corner. The owner of the ribbon should be hiding among the leaves and flowers on the slanting branches. It had been like this for the past few days. Today was also the fourth day. Little girl. Li Yunxin huffed softly in his heart. He knew that it was Xian Shilio. On the way to Yunshan, Xian Shilio said that there was a triple spy among the painting Taoist priests. Now it seemed that she was talking about herself. Perhaps the original owner of this body was really a spy of Moon Anju. But later she was seen through and possessed by the wandering souls of the Freemasonry. Along the way, Li Yunxin carefully studied her expression and did not notice anything unusual. Now that he thought about it, perhaps it was because he had rehearsed it a long time ago. He had long prepared a set of expressions and words. While talking to him, he was careful and focused on the performance. Perhaps he could achieve that kind of effect in a short period of time. It was just that, this possessed wandering soul was also interesting. Most of the wandering souls that Li Yunxin had seen in the past had lived for a long time and were crazy. However, Su Yusong, Zhuamuxia and Xan Shilio were very normal. If Xan Shilio was a wandering soul, what kind of wandering soul was she? She had actually been captured by Li Yunxin. For days ago her heart was hurt again. She wanted to stab him with a sword, but there was nothing she could do, so she ran away crying. However, from the next day onwards, she hid in the tree and watched Li Yunxin's movements from afar. Wasn't this the behavior of a little girl? Could it be that this wandering soul was originally a little girl and that was why she had such thoughts? For example, although her heart was hurt, she still loved him deeply. She hated him but couldn't let him go, so she hid and watched from afar. Perhaps she was even crying as she watched. Thinking of this, Li Yunxin let out a laugh. But soon, he was stunned again. Because a thought suddenly appeared in his mind. Before this, he felt strange and contradictory because Xan Shilio was acting like a naive and inexperienced little girl at this time, but when she came to talk to him, she disguised herself very well. If someone was scheming enough to deceive Li Yunxin, she would definitely not be an inexperienced little girl. This was the contradiction. However, the new thought in his mind was, what if her body was also Xan Shilio, and the wandering soul was also Xan Shilio? Because Li Yunxin saw the way Su Yusong and Zhuamuxia treated her. It was very much like how they treated their little daughter. If she was some unrelated wandering soul or some simple junior sister, the relationship between the three of them would be extremely strange. But when the three of them got along, it was extremely natural, as if they were really a family, as if Xan Shilio was really raised by them. Previously, at the foot of the floating mountain, Su Sheng had told Li Yunxin about the past of these two wandering souls. He said that these two were actually husband and wife in the past. Before they became wandering souls, they were husband and wife. After becoming wandering souls, they always addressed each other as husband and wife. The two had a daughter whose nickname was Yiqiong, but unfortunately she died at an early age. After becoming wandering souls, the two of them were obsessed with this. Therefore, they were the most gentle and normal two of the many wandering souls in the Freemasonry. If these two wandering souls had first extracted Xan Shilio's soul, she would not have been able to escape. Then they would have refined the extracted soul into a wandering soul and stuffed it back. In this way, they could be considered the real person but also not the real person. This could explain the strangeness in Li Yunxin's intuition, right? The various words spoken on the way to Cloud Mountain were both said by the wandering souls and indeed by Xan Shilio. Naturally, there were no major flaws. Now, although she was a wandering soul, she was essentially just a little girl with an obsession. All kinds of womanly behavior could be easily explained. If this was really the case, Su Yusong and Zhuamuxia really knew how to play. It was obvious that he had created a child for himself. Moreover, it was a child who lived a long life and could really enjoy the happiness of a family forever. Thinking of this, Li Yunxin frowned and sighed in his heart. He had miscalculated. For days ago, he had made a wrong move. Until he was captured by Su Yusong and Zhuamuxia in this house, he was still not very sure of Xan Shilio's identity. However, if Xan Shilio was a wandering soul of the Freemasonry, it was not a big deal for him to betray her. If Xan Shilio was indeed a spy of Munanju, then she must have long considered the extreme situation of, once her identity was exposed, after hiding in Cloud Mountain for so long. At that time he only betrayed her to escape with the help of his allies. At that time he was faced with a life-and-death situation, and Xan Shilio had much more room to maneuver than he did. The only thing he did not expect was the current level. She was neither Xan Shilio nor, damn it. If he had guessed this earlier, he would have given it a try. He would not have betrayed her immediately. He would have had to go through a lot of torture and humiliation, and in the end he would rather die than submit, forcing the little girl to jump out and put on a show of a loving woman bravely saving her husband. In this case, this Xan Shilio was still useful. His thoughts stopped here, and when he raised his eyes to look at the locust tree again, his belt had disappeared. Li Yunxin sighed again and got up from the bamboo couch. He had been meditating for nearly 4 hours. Overdoing it would consume his energy. It was time to do something else and change his mind. For example, he counted the number of hairs on the head of the third woman on the left in the Music in the Cool Palace painting. However, as soon as he got up, an oiled paper bag hit him. It fell on the bamboo couch and bounced to the ground. Li Yunxin turned his face. He did not know when Xan Shilio had turned to the west corridor. Perhaps the restriction in this house also blocked his perception, so he did not notice her like an ordinary person. Now that he saw it, he found that she was staring at him angrily with her eyebrows raised, as if she was questioning him. Chapter 467. Li Yunxin looked at the paper bag on the ground again. When he was about to pick it up, he thought of something. So he just looked at her calmly. They looked at each other for a while. Li Yunxin frowned. Xan Shilio blinked her eyes and was a little stunned. Because she didn't expect that Li Yunxin would have such an attitude. 4 days ago in this very room, he had sold himself without the slightest bit of integrity or hesitation. Now she came to see him again after 4 days. He didn't flatter her, nor did he apologize. There was not even a trace of fear or guilt on his face. He just said, indifferently, as if he didn't know why she was angry and why she came to see him. He said, Xan Shilio was a little dazed after being stunned for a while. It seemed that she saw Li Yunxin again that night. He told her some old things in a low voice and hid the sadness in his heart with a faint smile on his face. That was the person she wanted. Now he seemed to have become that person again. This thought turned around in her mind, and then she came to her senses. At this time she saw Li Yunxin turned around and was about to walk into the room. He seemed to be impatient because she didn't talk. Xan Shilio frowned again when she saw his indifferent attitude. She stared at him. Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin turned around again and said, again. Xan Shilio bit her lips and breathed twice angrily, as if she had swallowed all the words of reprimand and complaints. Finally she just said, "Why don't you see what's inside?" Li Yunxin looked down at the paper bag on the ground and was silent for a moment. Xan Shilio didn't know why, but she was also worried. She didn't feel relieved until Li Yunxin really turned around, walked 2 steps back, and bent down to pick up the paper bag. Then she saw Li Yunxin holding the thing in his hand and slowly opening it. It was a roasted chicken. It was not strange for a roasted chicken to appear anywhere, but it was strange for it to appear in Mount Shaoyin. Whether it was Su Yusong, Zhuamuja, Xan Shilio, or Li Yunxin, all of them could live on the energy of heaven and earth without eating grains. But now that he was imprisoned, the little demon girl had sent him such a gift. Li Yunxin was indeed surprised. He looked up, this time sincerely, and uttered a puzzled for the 3rd time. Xan Shilio glared at him. "Aren't you hungry?" Li Yunxin stared at her for 2 breaths of time, trying to figure out what she was trying to do. However, he soon realized what was going on. For the past few days he had been basking in the sun, half lying on the bamboo couch, basking in the sun while recalling the fragmented martial arts he had memorized before, secretly cultivating. Because of this, when there was plenty of time, one's thoughts would wander, and one would think of many things of the past as well as some memorable stories. For example, there was a book called Shishua Xanyu, that in a dynasty called Jin, there was a general named Long. When the weather was sunny, people would take out their own books to dry to prevent mold and insects, but he would also lie in the sun with his clothes open. When people asked him what he was doing, he would say that he was also drying books, the books hidden in his stomach. Didn't he look very similar to him now? Those books with words and pictures were taken away, but the contents were hidden in his stomach. Now that he thought about it slowly under the sun, it was a different approach to achieve the same result. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but touch his belly. It was just an unconscious movement. For a few days he would think of this story and do the same thing. Xan Shilio probably noticed this. For days ago she was so angry and wronged that she wanted to kill someone. But after 4 days her anger gradually subsided. She was overwhelmed with sadness. She wanted to find an opportunity to tell herself that her sadness was groundless, and that Li Yunxin might have his own difficulties. This behavior was similar to many infatuated people in the secular world. She first deceived herself in despair, and then gave herself to others to be deceived. Her heart softened in the end. She thought of Li Yunxin. He used to be the Wei River Dragon King, a peerless demon. In the face of dangerous situations, he came up with many ingenious strategies and saved himself from danger again and again. When it came to martial arts, he was brave and fearless. With the cultivation of the true state, he even killed the golden light with a Taoist artifact. Such a hero was now imprisoned in a small house, and was going to die soon. Moreover, she knew about Li Yunxin's past before she brought him to Yunshan. Xan Shilio remembered one of his hobbies very clearly. That was because Li Yunxin's hobby was very strange in her eyes. Li Yunxin loved delicious food. Logically speaking, cultivators would not care about fine wine and delicacies. However, Li Yunxin was a great demon that did not need the 5 grains. What was good was not human flesh and blood, but the food of the mortal world. This had always made her feel interesting, and because of it, Wei River Dragon King's image became more intimate. Then, on the first day when she saw Li Yunxin's action, she didn't notice it. At that time, her heart was still occupied by anger and resentment, and she only wanted to see his miserable appearance. Unexpectedly, she didn't see his miserable appearance, but saw a leisurely person. So she was puzzled, why was he so different from the person yesterday? On the second day she saw this action again. On the third day she saw this action again. So she slowly realized that maybe he was greedy. After all, she had only been a wandering soul for a short time, and she hadn't been a human for a long time. As a human she knew many things and many joys, probably more than ordinary cultivators, demons and wandering souls. She could understand Li Yunxin's feelings. So after leaving Mount Shaoyin she went to the mortals in the mountain and brought this thing. Now that Li Yunxin saw this he thought for a while and guessed the whole story. He held the oil paper in his hand and stared at it for a while. For a while both of them were silent. After a while Xan Shilio bit her lip. What are you looking at? Her tone was a little unruly, as if she was angry because her husband didn't understand, or blaming, because she saw the look in Li Yunxin's eyes. Obviously he was a little emotional and a little stunned. Of course he didn't expect that she would do this. Xan Shilio sighed sadly and felt moved in her heart, feeling sorry for her own feelings. But the next moment the roast chicken rolled to the ground. She could throw things in, but Li Yunxin couldn't throw things out. So he just threw the thing in his palm to the ground. The delicious food rolled and was covered with a layer of dust. Xan Shilio was stunned and didn't know what to say for a while. But Li Yunxin had already turned around, looked at her sideways and frowned. You don't have to worry about it. In the future Miss Xan don't come. Xan Shilio opened her mouth and finally became angry. Li Yunxin. You're a bastard. As she spoke, her tears fell again. The hope that she had slowly cultivated in her heart these days was shattered because of his actions just now. The deep sadness was stronger than the anger. She cried and said, Who are you? Bastard. You weren't like this a few days ago. You weren't like this 4 days ago either. You're also not like this 4 days ago. Who the hell are you? Who the hell are you? She cried but didn't leave. Her body was full of the fragrance of locust flowers. In fact, they didn't know how long they had been sitting in the tree. A series of questions came out of her mouth, which made Li Yunxin stop again. So, Li Yunxin stood silently in the shadow of the house, while Xan Shilio stood in the sunlight outside the house. Both of them seemed to be in a gloomy mood, at least it seemed so. Xan Shilio cried for a while, but suddenly wiped her tears and gritted her teeth. Well, since you're such a person, I'll let you have a taste of pain. Li Yunxin, do you know? I've caught Bai Yunxin and Hong Yangzi. After listening to her words, Li Yunxin still didn't say anything. But in the end he slowly turned around and looked at her. Xan Shilio bit her lips. She wiped away the tears on her face with her palm and said, You see, I'll destroy Bai Yunxin's cultivation and make her my mount. Hong Yangzi. I'll beat her back to her original form and steam her for you. Let's see if you can still be embarrassed. She stopped crying after saying this. She just stared at Li Yunxin with her red eyes. After more than 10 breaths, Li Yunxin suddenly sighed. Don't be silly. The little demon girl was stunned again. She hadn't expected Li Yunxin's reaction today, including this time. He was still not angry nor was he timid. Instead he said such a sentence and his tone was very helpless. After sighing, Li Yunxin took 2 steps forward. He was only 2 steps away from Xan Shilio, but there was an insurmountable barrier between them. I'll assume that what you said is true, he said in a low voice with no expression on his face. You really caught them. But it's also something that those 2 sent people to do for you. But they've been caught and brought to Yunshan. Is it something that you can deal with? Xan Shilio gritted her teeth. Of course. Senior brother promised me. Li Yunxin shook his head gently. I guess you asked your senior brother and sister to catch them because you want to vent your anger. But it's unlikely that they agreed just because you're unhappy. Xan Shilio, you should know who Bai Yunxin's adoptive father is and what's on Hong Yangzi's body. Compared to the Golden Rock King, I'm just a small figure. But they still spent a lot of effort to deal with me. As for the Golden Rock King, do they not care? And the reason why they did what you wanted is not because they spoil you unconditionally, but because they also want Bai Yunxin and Hong Yangzi. As for why they want Bai Yunxin, I can't say. But as for why they want Hong Yangzi, I guess it's because of the dragon soul in her body. It's just that this time you happened to mention it, so I let you do it. Li Yunxin spoke at a steady pace, but his breath was coherent. Every sentence he said was something that Xan Shilio had never thought of, so she wanted to interrupt and refute, but she couldn't find a chance. Now that he said this, he paused again. Looking at the stunned Xan Shilio, he sighed again. It's just that the parents of the royal family don't have unconditional love. Not to mention that your senior brother and sister have such a status and identity. Shilio. He suddenly called her by her name. So, you really don't know why I betrayed you 4 days ago? He stared straight at her. So, you really don't know why I betrayed you 4 days ago? Chapter 468. Whatever Li Yunxin said or asked in front of the word Shilio became unimportant for a moment. Xan Shilio's mind was now filled with Li Yunxin's suddenly softer tone and the word Shilio. She was already angry and desperate, but now there was a twist. She was stunned for a while and then said in a daze. What? Then she came to her senses. What did you say? Li Yunxin looked at her seriously. People like Su Yusong and Zhuo Muzhou won't spoil you unconditionally. They can tolerate you for many things. But there are some things that they can't tolerate. Do you think I really didn't know who you were before? After saying this, he looked at Xan Shilio. You used to be Xan Shilio and you're still Xan Shilio. I already knew it on the way to Yunshan. Some words were ambiguous, and in the ears of people who didn't know what was going on, it was nonsense. But if it fell into the ears of others, it would be extremely clear. Xan Shilio was stunned. You know? How did you know? Li Yunxin breathed a sigh of relief. He had been very unlucky these days and now it seemed that he finally had good luck. He got the best result with just one test. So he smiled and shook his head. If I don't even know this, I would have died long ago after experiencing so many dangerous situations alone. After saying this, he looked at Xan Shilio. What do you want me to do that day? Think about that day. I would rather die than surrender, and I was tenacious and unyielding. Then, when things got worse, I would ask you to plead on my behalf. Xan Shilio was about to speak, but Li Yunxin shook his head again. Don't be silly, Shilio. I don't want you to do that kind of thing. Wandering souls. You are all wandering souls. Since you are a wandering soul, you should know what obsession is. Obsession is not something that can be judged by common sense. There is no reason to talk about it, he said in a low voice. Su Yusong and Zhuo Muzhou used to be husband and wife, but they lost a child. Therefore they couldn't forget it and became an obsession. This thing is also the basis for them to transform into wandering souls and stay in this world. Then they created you, didn't they? Li Yunxin looked at her. Do you think they meant well? Xan Shilio wasn't sure why he suddenly brought this up. In the past she wouldn't have told Li Yunxin this. But now, she seemed to have finally realized that things weren't like that, and that he seemed to have his own difficulties. For a moment she couldn't care about anything else. Thus she bit her lips. Now that I am immortal, I have many magical powers. Of course, Li Yunxin sighed. There are many ways to achieve longevity. They had Daotong, Kenzo, and painting schools. You could even rule the world. If you want to live forever, isn't there a better way than being a wandering soul? Dao techniques could not be cultivated? Could he not cultivate the sword Dao? Now, aren't you also cultivating the Dao of painting? Xan Shilio frowned. What are you trying to say? The reason why they wanted to refine you into a wandering soul was that they could refine your obsession. Li Yunxin looked at her with pity. Of course, there was some pity and gentleness in his eyes. I don't know what your obsession is. But you know that you were killed first and then refined, yet you are still so close to them. It can be seen that it is something similar. They actually refined you into their own child. But Shilio. Li Yunxin paused. Which real parent in the world would treat their child as a plaything and kill her? They didn't do it for you, but for their own comfort. Xan Shilio didn't say anything. It seemed that she knew what Li Yunxin said. However, her knowledge was different from ordinary people's knowledge. She knew, but she didn't feel anything. As a wandering soul, some obsession made her unable to resonate with certain things. She just knew it. After 2 breaths, she said in a low voice, "But what does it have to do with our matter?" It has to do with their obsession. Li Yunxin looked at her. Paranoid thoughts, paranoid possessiveness. In their hearts, you should be theirs. In the secular world, ordinary parents are reluctant when they marry off their daughter, let alone a wandering soul who is the foundation of their existence. At first they asked you to see me to confuse me. But if they find out that you really love me, and that your feelings don't just belong to the two of them, what do you think will happen to you? Li Yunxin spoke more slowly and made his voice lower. They don't love you. But your identity, your feelings. They can love one Xan Shilio or they can love another person. As long as this person is in their heart and loves them. The love of a wandering soul and the love of an ordinary person may seem the same, but in fact, there is a world of difference. This may be difficult for you to understand, but I do. So, I don't want you to do anything stupid. In your eyes it can prove my feelings for you, but it can push you to your death. Li Yunxin paused, took a deep breath and took a step back. Xanxilio, don't worry. Xanxilio, you are the most unlike a wandering soul I have ever seen. Although you are a member of the Freemasonry, you haven't done many evil things. Although you have obsession, you also have a sincere heart. This kind of heart is rare even in the secular world. You and I, our opponents, enemies, our feelings can't come to fruition. But even so, I hope you can live a happy life. Li Yunxin looked at her. For days ago I wanted to tell you to give up. But just now my heart softened again. But I know that what I am doing now, whether for you or for me, is just drinking poison to quench thirst. Now, I will tell you for the last time. He was silent for a while and looked at Xanxilio, who did not say a word. Don't come here anymore. I will die and I don't have much time left. You will forget me sooner or later. In the remaining days I just want to do what I should have done the most. At least before I die, I will be proficient in what I should be proficient in so that these last days will not be filled with regrets. I don't want my heart to be in turmoil again. Just think that I lied to you and betrayed you. After saying this, he did not stay any longer. He turned around and entered the house, closing the door behind him. This time, Xanxilio did not make a fuss. She stood there in a daze, only staring at the door. Only tears flowed silently. Although you have obsession, you also have a sincere heart. I will die, and I don't have much time left. These last days will not be filled with regrets. Xanxilio stood in front of the house for a quarter of an hour, repeating these heartless and sad words many times in her heart. Finally, she turned around and slowly walked away. It was not until Xanxilio disappeared behind the wall of locust trees that Li Yunxin slowly opened the door and walked out. It looked like he wanted to go out for some fresh air. He finally stopped beside the bamboo couch and looked down at the ground. The roasted chicken covered in dust was still lying on the ground. He bent down and picked up the roasted chicken, using 2 fingers to tear off a piece of meat from the chicken's breast. He didn't care about the dust on it and slowly put it into his mouth. He chewed it twice. His expression finally relaxed a little, and he casually threw the roasted chicken away, then turned around and returned to the house. The rest of the day passed slowly. There was no sun on Little Cloud Mountain, only the top of the sky was shining. But even so, the light was no different from the sunlight. In the strong fragrance of locust flowers, the sky turned from bright white to warm yellow, and then from warm yellow to orange-red. Finally, night fell, and the lights in the floating mountain were lit up, as if there were really countless people living there. The 4th day and night of Li Yunxin's imprisonment passed like this. Other than the chirping of insects and birds, there were no other disturbances. So the 5th day came. Still nothing happened. Then it was the 6th day, the 7th day, the 8th day. Still nothing happened. No one came to see him again and no one sent him roasted chicken. Therefore he didn't know that in these days, other than him, the 8 dragon sons had all come to the Yi country. 2 dragon sons guarded one side, and there were tens of thousands of demon soldiers and demon generals under their command, like a pocket, surrounding the Black Tower in front of the Xuanmen's cultivators. In these days there were already small-scale conflicts between the 2 sides. Some demon soldiers and demon generals were not restrained, and ran to find trouble with the cultivators. In fact, most of it was because they were oppressed by the Xuanmen cultivators in the past, and only dared to hide in the deep mountains. Now that they could finally fight to their heart's content, they were too complacent. These small-scale conflicts had wins and losses, but it didn't affect the overall situation. Among the Xuanmen cultivators, the number of cultivators above the true state was more than twice the number of demons above the true state. Although the number of low-level cultivators was only 1/3 of the low-level demon soldiers and demon generals, there was no need to be afraid. The outcome of the war was ultimately decided by the high-level combat power. Humans and demons below the transcendent state couldn't even fly. Even if they had to squeeze out hundreds of thousands or millions of people on the ground, what could they do? Therefore, it seemed that the war situation was extremely advantageous to the Xuanmen cultivators. They had many high-level cultivators and they were well disciplined. Their minds were more flexible than demons and there was no reason for them to lose. Until, on the 9th day, 2 news came. The first news was not noticed by people and only spread in the Allied camp. In fact, at this time, the number of people in the Allied camp was gradually decreasing. Perhaps it was because the Qing soldiers were slaughtered by the cultivators for no reason, or because the emperors of the various countries had other plans, the allied army of the various countries was retreating bit by bit, each with their own excuses. However, the cultivators didn't care much. After all, these mortals' mission was completed. A considerable amount of red soil and other resources were transported to the vicinity of Tongtian Swamp. If they left, then so be it. Staying here wouldn't be of any help and might even be a hindrance. Therefore, this news was known by very few cultivators and only mortals were interested. There had been a great change in the official circles of the Qing kingdom. It was said that the Qing heavenly official Zhao Zheng of the Ministry of Officials had been beheaded for 10 unpardonable crimes. The Zhao clan within the Qing kingdom had also been executed. However, there were still some branches in other countries, so the Qing court had sent out documents to the neighboring countries, asking them to extradite the criminals to the Qing kingdom. As for how the other countries would react, it was not immediately clear. In the end, the Zhao clan within the Qing kingdom had already lost all hope of survival. There was no possibility of them rising again. Once the Zhao clan fell, a large number of their old students were also taken care of. It was said that everyone in the capital of the Qing kingdom felt insecure. Some officials had only heard the sound of horse hooves passing by their front door and were so frightened that they committed suicide. However, they were not the ones being taken. What was most surprising was that the person in charge of this purge was not the Qing emperor. Rather, it was the 18-year-old crown prince of the Qing kingdom. Thus, people realized that this should mean that the crown prince's power and position were gradually stabilizing and that he had already won the Qing emperor's trust. However, there were still people who were worried. The crown prince had full authority to handle this kind of matter. It was almost the same as handing all the vacancies to the crown prince. The new officials would all be his trusted aides. Thus, the power that had previously been taken away by the group of civil officials did not reach the Qing emperor's hands. Instead, it was taken by the crown prince. In the history of the various countries, this kind of situation was not a good thing. The crown prince's power was too great, so coups would occasionally happen. The Qing emperor's present actions were truly dangerous. However, the second piece of news that followed not only stunned those people who were worried about this, but it also startled the cultivators. It was said that it startled Yunshan and the two saints. On the 9th night, the Qing emperor died. The Qing emperor's soul was not restrained by Yanjun. A true Daotong realm cultivator stationed in the capital had not arrived in time. Within 2 hours of his death, the Qing emperor's soul used the power of faith of the 24,460,000 people within the Qing kingdom to, in one night, he became a true realm ghost emperor. Chapter 469. In reality, Daotong and Kenzo had expected such a thing to happen. Before, Emperor Li had become a ghost emperor. Now, the battle between the Shen men and the demons was approaching. Cultivators had to be on guard. As a result, a true realm cultivator was assigned to guard every monarch. Most emperors welcomed this. Even an emperor would have a hard time seeing a true realm cultivator. Now they had to watch over them. It was a great opportunity. Many emperors who wanted to ask for cultivation methods and strengthen their bodies had high hopes for this. Some even used the power of the whole country to build a golden platform for immortals in one night. But the problem was, emperors were human but immortals were not like humans. Immortals did not like what emperors liked. They did not live in palaces as emperors had expected. Most of the immortals only showed their faces and gave their decrees. Then they disappeared. In reality, with the cultivation of true state cultivators, even if they were dozens of li away, it would only take a moment to get to the emperor's side. Even if they were to find a secluded place to cultivate, there wouldn't be any slip-ups. The situation in Qing kingdom was probably the same. The only difference was that the Qing emperor did not like these cultivators very much. In fact, he had liked them before. But the Qing emperor had made requests to Daotong and Kenzo through the cultivators stationed in the capital. He said he could offer all the rare treasures in his palace treasury in exchange for cultivation methods. And he would not be an emperor. Instead, he would be a low-level disciple in Daotong or Kenzo. Like all cultivators, he would diligently cultivate step by step in order to live forever. But his request was rejected once. After that, there was not even a response. This was a great humiliation for an emperor. Thus, in the following 10 years, the Qing emperor's attitude toward Daotong and Kenzo cultivators was always cold. This time, the cultivators stationed in Qing kingdom's capital knew this. Thus, they only showed up once in the palace and left. Most emperors thought that the main purpose of these cultivators coming to the mortal world was to protect their personal safety. But in reality, it was the opposite. The cultivators did not care whether the emperors lived or died. What they cared about was the matter of attaining the body of a ghost emperor. If a demon invaded and wanted to kill the emperor, they only needed to ensure that the emperor's soul was erased as soon as he died. If the situation was special, he might take care of the empress and a few high-ranking officials. After all, even if the emperor died, there was still the crown prince. What was there to care about the life and death of a mortal? The cultivators of the Qing kingdom also thought so. However, the Qing kingdom once had a Qing Shui man. On the 9th night, a true realm great demon appeared in the capital. However, this demon was not good at concealing its aura. As soon as it appeared, it was immediately noticed by the cultivators. The situation that the cultivators had expected had happened. The demons would also send out great demons to assassinate the emperors of the various countries and create a ghost emperor. Thus, he immediately gave chase and began to fight in the clouds high up in the sky. The demon was no match for it and fled far away. However, the cultivators did not pursue him. However, an hour later the demon came again. The two sides fought again and the demon was still defeated. Thus, in the first half of the night, the demons had attacked 6 times. By the 7th time, the cultivators were slightly angered and chased a little further. When they were 100 li away from the capital, they suddenly sensed that the Qing emperor's life had been cut off. He was immediately shocked, afraid that he had fallen for the demon's plan to lure him away. However, just as he was about to rush back to collect the Qing emperor's soul, the true realm great demon made a scene and refused to let him go. Since it was so, he could only do his best to kill. 2 hours later, he finally killed the true realm great demon and returned to the capital. However, it was already too late. The Qing emperor had become a ghost emperor and had long disappeared. When he asked the palace servants beside him, he found out that he had not been killed by a demon. Instead, he had committed suicide. This kind of situation was not unanticipated. However, the problem was, ever since the Xianmen had been passed down until now, the Qing emperor was the first emperor to commit suicide. The emperor had the most powerful power in the secular world. This kind of power was enough to provide them with even more powerful support, allowing them to face the heart demons that many mortals might have and not walk down the path of ruin themselves. Furthermore, for tens of thousands of years, the Xianmen cultivators had repeatedly explained one thing to the mortal emperors: there was a great difference between ghosts and humans. When people were alive, they had 7 emotions and 6 desires, and their minds were clear. When people died, their souls were damaged. The so-called ghost soul was nothing more than an incomplete soul. The reason why people were people and were themselves was because they had their own memories, personalities, and even bodies. However, if they became a ghost, their memories were incomplete, their personalities changed, and their bodies no longer existed. They no longer liked the things they liked as a human and no longer hated the things they hated as a human. What did this have to do with themselves? Profound cultivators might be able to retain their own characteristics to a certain extent, but it was absolutely impossible for mortals. Furthermore, not only were the Xianmen cultivators wary of this matter, but Black Bai Yanjun also would not allow this to happen. In reality, in the lives of the emperors, they would at least once personally witness the miraculous methods of the Xianmen cultivators. That was after ascending the throne. After ascending the throne, cultivators would appear. They would explain to the mortal emperors some things that only a very small number of people knew and show evidence. For example, evidence of the existence of Sanluo Hall, Black Bai Yanjun, and evidence of the existence of celestials. Some of these evidence might be real and some might be fake. But for the mortal emperors, it was already ironclad evidence. From this, they knew that there were gods above the sky, and that there were retribution in the netherworld. Therefore, in the tens of thousands of years, the mortal emperors of the Midland might have been stupid and incompetent, but almost none of them were cruel and tyrannical. Because they knew that there was a powerful force in the world that was beyond their understanding, watching everything at all times. Therefore, until the night of the 9th day, the Xianmen cultivators still thought that the possibility of an emperor suddenly committing suicide at this critical moment was very small. They did not expect that the Qing emperor would be the first. Then they realized that they had made a mistake. The reason for this mistake was related to the Xuanmen's policy toward the mortal world for tens of thousands of years. However, at this time many factors overlapped and finally led to a big disaster. They dealt with the ghost emperor excessively crudely. After learning that someone in the Qing army had personally seen the ghost emperor and spread the news in the allied camp, the Xuanmen's response was to send a low-level cultivator from the Five Swords sect, Dao Qizi, to the Qing army camp to deal with the matter. Dao Qizi's way of dealing with the matter was indeed the Xuanmen's style. He killed Ding Min and the others and then killed everyone who talked about the matter. Although this way of dealing with the matter could not seal the secret of the Ghost Emperor, it could minimize the impact. As for whether or not the other emperors would know of this matter and how they would react if they did, no one thought that they would have the courage to openly rebel against the Xianmen. Who would have thought that before this matter could be accomplished, Dao Qizi himself would be killed? Dao Qizi was killed, the golden light rushed over, fought with Li Yunxin, and affected a large number of mortal soldiers. In addition, Li Yunxin's encouraging words when he killed Dao Qizi not only did not forcefully suppress the matter of the Ghost Emperor, but it quickly spread like wildfire. In the mortal world there were many people born with keen eyes. They had long discovered that there had been more and more wandering ghosts in the world recently. They were afraid that something had happened to Sanluo Temple. All kinds of factors mixed together. Finally, the matter of the Qing Emperor happened. The death of the Qing Emperor was only the beginning. In this year 2 emperors had died. One was the Li Emperor, who had achieved the mysterious realm of the Ghost Emperor's body. He had crippled 5 Xianmen high cultivators that previous emperors only dared to worship. Next was the Qing Emperor, who had achieved the true realm of the Ghost Emperor's body. Although he did not start a killing spree, the true realm Xianmen cultivators could do nothing. The success rate was almost 100%. In the past, the Xianmen cultivators first warned the emperors that being a ghost was different from being a human. Then they warned them that Black Baiyanjun would collect souls. However, the cultivators had overlooked the difference between immortals and mortals. When immortals cultivated, the most important thing was one's self and one's heart. Emperors. As emperors, although they had great power, how many things could they really do according to their own will? Secular farmers could even have affairs in the fields, but emperors still had to pay attention to their daily lives when they were having sex. To them, things like oneself and one's conscience became insignificant in the face of factors like absolute power, further authority, and eternal existence. If they knew that Black Baiyanjun would no longer collect souls, then the saying, being a ghost means you are not yourself, was not worth mentioning in the face of an emperor with a heart of steel. Thus, on the 10th day, Emperor Yu, who had been badly battered because of the rebel army's power, died and transformed into a ghost emperor. It was suicide. At noon on the 10th day, Rong's army attacked the capital of Yu Kingdom. Yu Kingdom fell. At the same time, Yi Emperor died and also committed suicide. But at this time, the cultivators of the Mystic Gate were already on guard. Although there were demons pestering Yi Di when he passed away, the front line of the Mystic Gate was still within the borders of the Yi Kingdom. A profound realm cultivator rushed over to kill the true realm demon, and the true realm cultivator rushed to the palace in time to scatter Yi Di's soul. But things were already out of control. On the 10th night, another 5 emperors died. 4 of them committed suicide and their souls were scattered. One of them was about to commit suicide and was destroyed in body and soul by a cultivator. Although there was a lesson from last time, the Xianmen cultivators could not change their attitude toward secular people. A cultivator killed an emperor in the palace. This matter caused a stir in the world. Some emperors began to announce the expulsion of Xianmen cultivators within their borders. Although others watched with cold eyes, they already felt the cold in their hearts. Xianmen, who had protected the secular world for more than 50,000 years, seemed to have lost the hearts of the people in just a few days. And one of the initiators of all this was still imprisoned on the floating mountain. It was already the 10th day. Chapter 470. Li Yunxin was still sitting on the bamboo couch. It was getting dark outside and the night was coming. The locust flowers at the edge of the courtyard had withered, and the green grass was covered in white. However, the fragrance was still there, but it became soft. Usually he would get up and go back to the house after an hour. But today he decided to wait a little longer. He had fixed the things in his mind in the past 10 days. Now, he had to wait for something new. But it didn't come. The 5th or 6th day should have come. Thinking of this, he even raised his hand and touched his face in confusion. What went wrong? He had spent enough effort and done enough work that day. There was no reason. Suddenly he heard footsteps. His heart skipped a beat and he turned to look. But it wasn't Xian Shilio but a young man. His appearance had changed, but his temperament hadn't. Li Yunxin squinted his eyes and realized that this person should be Su Yusong. So that's what happened. Li Yunxin heaved a sigh of relief. He was finally relieved, but he was also disappointed. At this time, the lights in the house were also turned on, and the sky was finally completely dark. Warm yellow light shone from the window, casting warm spots of light on the wooden platform, the grass, and the bay outside. In fact, it looked very leisurely and comfortable. Tonight, Su Yusong was dressed like a young man in his mid-20s. He looked dignified, calm, and steady, and gave off a feeling of majestic grandeur. Su Yusong walked 4 or 5 steps away from Li Yunxin and stopped. He stared at him for a while as if he was thinking about something. Since he was here and Xan Shilio was not, it probably meant that Li Yunxin's plan had failed. Therefore, he was too lazy to get up. He just lay down rudely and responded to Su Yusong's gaze. After about half an hour, Su Yusong suddenly said, "Why do you have a demon seed?" Li Yunxin frowned. What? He didn't expect the other party to ask this question. It was the first time he heard the word, demon seed. Oh, you haven't heard of it? Demonic seed. Su Yusong nodded and paced on the ground. Then I'll ask you another question. How can you use your supernatural power in Mount Shaoyun? Many thoughts flashed through Li Yunxin's mind. He realized that Su Yusong was probably talking about something he thought he knew, but in reality he didn't. Su Yusong asked him how he could use his divine sense in Mount Shaoyun. Su Sheng told him that the origin of the cultivation method of the art of painting was different from that of Daotong and Kenzo. Therefore his divine sense could still be used. Since the sage of calligrapher had said so, Li Yunxin accepted it without hesitation. But now hearing Su Yusong's question, could it be related to some demonic seed? Li Yunxin subconsciously circulated her spiritual energy through her snow mountain ocean of qi, meridians, and acupoints. But he didn't notice anything messy. He paused and said calmly, "That's because I cultivate the art path. In essence, it's different from that of Daotong and Kenzo." Su Yusong smiled. "Oh, that's what he told you." Actually, up until now, Su Yusong was probably the most comfortable to get along with among all the bad guys that Li Yunxin had met. Because just by looking at his appearance, tone of speech, and style of doing things, he really looked like a gentle and honest person. He wasn't as ruthless and cruel as other demons, nor was he as evil and strange as other wandering souls. Compared to the cultivators of Xianmen, he was more human. But it was this person who had instigated a series of troublesome things. And now he smiled and said this as if he was chatting, then added, "Actually, he doesn't know either. The origin of the painting path cultivation method that he told you about was mostly what Chen Zhao told him 1,000 years ago. As for whether Chen Zhao told the truth, it's hard to guess. But you won't have the chance to ask him anymore." Su Yusong looked up at Li Yunxin. "I've already erased his consciousness. I'm going to refine him into a wandering soul. A wandering soul made from a saint's tribulation body will definitely be extraordinary." Li Yunxin was silent for a moment. "I don't have any special relationship with him. At first, we were just natural allies determined by our positions. If you're willing, I can still work for you now." Su Yusong's expression was originally indifferent. But after hearing Li Yunxin's indifferent words, his brows suddenly furrowed imperceptibly, and the corners of his mouth also pressed down. It was as if he wanted to reprimand him, but he suppressed it. Li Yunxin keenly noticed this and didn't say anything. Then Su Yusong snorted and laughed. "There's no need to talk about this now. Let me tell you first, why can you use your divine ability in Little Cloud Mountain? Because there's a demonic seed in your body, not some painting technique." Then he pointed at himself. "In my body. All the wandering souls of the Freemasonry have demonic seeds in their bodies. There are also demonic seeds in the bodies of demons. In fact, it's precisely because this thing originally appeared in the bodies of demons and was the most common in the bodies of demons that it got this name." Li Yunxin blinked. "You're lying. If demons all have demonic seeds in their bodies, how could I have never heard of this?" Su Yusong smiled faintly. "Heard? Where did you hear it? In these 50,000 years, how did the celestial sect of wonders explain the matter of animals obtaining the Tao? The saying you heard was just that they sensed the essence of the sun and moon and sensed the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, so they developed intelligence and became enlightened. Don't you find it strange?" Li Yunxin frowned. "What's strange?" But after saying this, he was stunned. He already knew what was strange. Many things were like this. It was often right in front of him, but he was used to seeing it and didn't feel anything unusual. But if someone pointed it out, he would immediately be enlightened. For example, now, thinking about it carefully, the demons were indeed a little strange. This referred to the cultivation method of the celestial sect of wonders. From how to refine the first wisp of spiritual energy to how to enter the supreme Wang Qing, there were detailed explanations and elaborations. In Li Yunxin's view, This was indeed a self-consistent theory that was completely in line with the laws of this world. It could explain many things and also predict many things. Whether a person could cultivate or not, to what extent they could cultivate with such a theory to test, there was almost no error. But when it came to demons, there was no theory or system. As for what kind of animals could obtain the Tao, there was only a vague sentence: obtain the opportunity to gain spiritual intelligence. But what was the opportunity? No one could explain it. This was a world of difference from the situation of human cultivators. However, this was not strange in the eyes of the people of this world. After all, humans and animals were different, so it was reasonable for humans to be different from demons. But Li Yunxin knew that humans, monkeys, cows and horses were essentially no different. They were just living creatures. When humans obtained the Tao through cultivation, didn't they also become intelligent? Thinking of this, he opened his mouth and looked at Su Yusong as if he suddenly understood. It's really strange. A person who hid something and didn't say it, but insisted on asking the other party bit by bit, probably liked to see the other party have such a reaction. Perhaps Su Yusong knew that Li Yunxin was echoing him, or perhaps he didn't care even if he knew, so he just smiled. Strange. But in the past, the cultivators of the celestial sect of wonders didn't find it strange. Or, the high-level cultivators wanted to forget emotions, so they didn't take the demons seriously. It should be known that 3,000 years ago, the highest cultivation level of the demons in this world was only in the profound realm. Since they could steadily suppress the demons for tens of thousands of years, why would they bother to find out how the animals obtained the Tao? If they really found out and the demons obtained it, wouldn't they be looking for a big trouble for themselves? Until we slowly took over Cloud Mountain and wanted to solve this matter once and for all. Su Yusong said slowly, if we could know how the animals obtained the Tao, then it would be very easy to exterminate them. If we could exterminate them, then it would be very easy to suppress and defend them. So we began to do it secretly. And we achieved some results. Hearing this, Li Yunxin's heart skipped a beat and he sat up from the bed. This is the secret. The legendary secret, that if you obtain it, you can conquer all the demons in the world? Su Yusong smiled. No. Li Yunxin spread his hands. Oh. Su Yusong looked at Li Yunxin for a while, as if many thoughts were going through his mind. And Li Yunxin also looked at him. In fact, he understood the current situation. The two of them were talking peacefully in the beautiful and warm courtyard, and the atmosphere seemed to be very harmonious. What kind of situation it was? It was the calm before the storm. He could feel the suppressed anger under Su Yusong's gentle appearance. Because it was too strong. Su Yusong could be extremely angry but calm. Because it seemed that there would be other programs in the future. This Su Yusong let out a light breath and continued, the result we achieved was nothing. Originally, I thought it would be very simple, following the cultivation method of the Shenmen, finding similar principles and rules, and testing it on the demons. But no matter how we tried, we never succeeded. At that time, it was 5,000 years ago. The experiment lasted for nearly 1,000 years. At that time, we still didn't have control over the saints, and could only rely on the masters of the heavenly caves and the sect masters to slowly advance these things. So many people's intelligence and wisdom, but there were no results for 1,000 years. So, we decided to use a more stupid method. Su Yusong stretched out a finger and pointed to the ground, heaven-reaching swamp. This place, 5,000 years ago, was a high mountain. The mountain was steep and the main peak was especially majestic. Many years ago, the main peak was hollowed out and used to anchor the Cloud Mountain. So we added a restriction on the top of the main peak and set up a huge cage. This cage could contain several large cities in the secular world, and could accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. We also set up mountains, rivers, weather, rain and snow inside, and had specialized cultivators look after it. Then we put 1 million birds and beasts inside. Chapter 471. Since we can't deduce anything, we've decided to observe some principles, to find out what can be achieved and why we can achieve Tao. Then, 500 years passed like this. Su Yusong took a deep breath. The spiritual energy on the main peak was rich, and those animals were much stronger than those in other places. But they were only strong. In 500 years, they reproduced from generation to generation, and there were indeed 4 demons among them. But there was nothing special about those 4 demons. They didn't have more or stronger spiritual energy than other places just because the spiritual energy here was rich. From this, it can be seen that the spiritual energy of heaven and earth had a great impact on whether the demons could achieve Tao or not. So, in the next 500 years, cultivators were sent to preach to them. However, after 500 years, only 5 fiendish demons had appeared. From this, it can be seen that opportunities and the like have no impact on the demons achieving Tao. After the demons gained spiritual intelligence, listening to the preaching was beneficial, but if their spiritual intelligence was not developed, it was useless no matter how they preached. So, we abandoned this place, we removed the prohibition spell and didn't care about it anymore. Because we thought of a new direction. Why not look at those demons who had achieved Tao and see what they had in common? Su Yusong lowered his head and smiled, shaking his head. I should have thought of this earlier. After a thorough investigation, I was able to find something. The spiritual intelligence of these demons who achieved Tao seemed to come out of nowhere. It wasn't born little by little, but one day, it suddenly became clear and enlightened. And the little bit of clarity in their spiritual platform seemed to be some kind of supernatural power, rules. And because of this little bit of clarity, the demons could enjoy the worship of the human world and be fine, but human cultivators couldn't. Since it was found in the bodies of the demons, we called it the demon seed. Until today, we still haven't found out where the demon seed came from, and why it only exists in the bodies of the demons. Su Yusong said this, looking at Li Yunxin. Now that you are a demon, you should also have that little bit of clarity. It's just that the demon seed has already merged with you, so you can't feel it. The so-called demon seed was a new concept for Li Yunxin. This matter. If even he didn't know about it, then not many people in the world would know about it. He frowned and thought for a while. He looked up at Su Yusong and said, "But you, the master of calligraphy and the master of art, can all use their supernatural powers here. So many saints have lived on this cloud mountain. It is the sacred land of the Xian sect. Naturally, there would be a lot of arrangements. It had been passed down from generation to generation, and restrictive formations were everywhere. Whether it was him or me, we were only able to use our divine abilities because of the ubiquitous restrictions. But even so, most of the formations can no longer be used and only a few are still in use. He thought that I couldn't control his body as I pleased, so I wouldn't be able to use those formations. Even though I haven't cultivated the 6 desires tribulation body, I still have other tricks up my sleeves. It's okay to use it once in a while." Su Yusong looked at Li Yunxin. "But Art Saint can use divine powers? Not because of restrictions or arrays. Just like you, she has a demonic seed in her body. I think because of this, only you can make the fastest progress in cultivating the painting Tao." Su Yusong's eyes slowly narrowed. "Where did you come from?" Li Yunxin had previously guessed that other people's slow progress in cultivating the painting Tao was because Art Saint had led everyone astray. But now, Su Yusong gave him another explanation. Maybe it was a combination of both. Because he thought of an example. The sheriff, Shu Ku, Pheasant, and Sky were the 4 demons who listened to him. Moreover, the cultivation technique that he described also had some painting techniques and tricks in it. Then, the 4 demons hadn't taken human form at first, but later they progressed abnormally fast and reached the emptiness realm. Was it really related to their demonic seeds? Would those with demonic seeds be faster in cultivating the painting Tao? If that was the case, he could finally understand what the so-called demonic of Art Saint entering the demonization realm 1,000 years ago referred to. As for, where did he come from, naturally it was useless to ask. After thinking about this, Li Yunxin stood up and looked at Su Yusong. "Okay, I already know what the demonic seeds are about. So, why are you telling me this?" Su Yusong smiled again and waved his hand. "Let's put this aside for now. I'm not just talking about the demonic seeds, there's also another thing. I said that the main peak that used to be the cage was abandoned. Do you know what happened later that led to today's Tongtian swamp?" He narrowed his eyes before and smiled now. These 2 movements fell into Li Yunxin's eyes and he knew that the gentler he looked at this time, the angrier he was in his heart. It seemed that he was finally going to get to the point. So he also took a deep breath. "I'm all ears." Su Yusong looked at him with a smile and said softly, "That place was abandoned 4,000 years ago, and after that no one cared about it. The Cloud Mountain fell once every 500 years and it only passed once. Then, 3,000 years ago the Cloud Mountain fell again. But it found that there was a rock demon there. As for the real body, it was one of the many golden feathered rocks that were placed inside 2,000 years ago. This demon had originally gained spiritual intelligence 2,000 years ago, but it was lucky to fool people. So, it first cultivated in this place with rich spiritual power for 500 years, and its cultivation was already quite profound. So, it concealed itself. In the remaining 500 years, it listened to the Shenmen cultivators preach. It actually became the first demon to cultivate the heavenly heart technique. Its progress was even faster. You have to know that there are actually quite a lot of demons who have gained spiritual intelligence. But the reason why there are so few demons is because they kill each other. And this rock demon had no natural enemies in the cage, but it was not only nourished by spiritual power, but also cultivated the technique. 2,000 years. Su Yusong sighed softly. Then it became the first demon to enter the supreme emotionless realm with the Taoist technique. Li Yunxin was stunned. After a while he said, "You're talking about the Golden Rock King." "Yes, the Golden Rock King." Su Yusong sighed and said, "By 3,000 years ago this Golden Rock was already in the supreme realm. Because it cultivated the Taoist technique, it became bolder. It actually appeared and requested that the mountain be given to him as a Taoist field, so that he could restrain all the demons in the world and become the common master of all demons. From then on, it lived in harmony with the Shenmen and protected the world together." Ah! Such a request in the eyes of the Shenmen, isn't it extremely daring? Moreover, it was also the first great demon to enter the supreme realm. No one wanted it to stay in the world. So, there was a huge battle. After that battle, the mountain disappeared, but the Tongtian swamp appeared. The Shenmen lost many people and the rock demon also escaped. In the end, the Shenmen no longer mentioned the matter of killing the rock demon, and the rock demon also didn't mention the common master of the world. Both of them suffered losses, and were temporarily unable to do anything to each other. But there was a tacit agreement, on the basis that the rock demon didn't reveal the heavenly heart technique to the demons. Hearing this, Li Yunxin took a deep breath. Previously, when he was in the Hatred Palace, he had heard Bai Yunxin talk about the past of her adoptive father being sealed, the appearance of Shinryu 2,000 years ago. So, at that time, the three sages instigated a dispute between Shinryu and the Rock King, and helped Shinryu seal the Golden Rock. Now that he heard this from Su Yusong, he understood why it wasn't the Shinryu that was sealed. It was because the Rock King knew about the heavenly heart technique. The Shenmen had long wanted to get rid of him. But the problem was still, why was he telling him this? Su Yusong saw his expression and smiled again. "Now the Golden Rock's adoptive daughter is in my hands. Red Madam is also in my hands now. You should know that Red Lady has half of the dragon soul in her body. You should also know how the Golden Rock was sealed back then." Li Yunxin let out a light breath. "Su Yusong, you're finally getting to the point. With these two things I can find the place where the Golden Rock is sealed and release him. Once the Golden Rock is released, it will definitely seek trouble with Shinryu. But Shinryu is far away in the east, and the 9 dragon sons are right in front of me. So, this Golden Rock is my trump card. It depends on whether I want to use it or not. So you're right." The smile on Su Yusong's face slowly faded. His tone also gradually became cold. "I didn't capture Bai Yunxin and Red Lady for Shilio. It was for myself." "Oh." Li Yunxin sighed. "She told you." "She ran to get the painting technique." Su Yusong stared at him coldly. "She still wants to know the method to break your seal from me? But how can I not know what she wants to do? I asked her a little and then I knew how you told her that day. Li Yunxin, you've learned to be a gossiper." Knowing this result, Li Yunxin laughed. "So I'm right." The gentle and honest Mr. Su, who doesn't bat an eyelid when talking about the general situation of the world, is now talking about his little daughter, but his anger is overflowing. It's obvious that obsession can't be touched. Once it is touched, it will jump up and down. So, she wanted to save me but was stopped by you. Now, you've made up your mind to kill me, and before that you were just chatting with someone who is about to die? Su Yusong was not moved and only looked at him coldly. 10 days ago you begged me for mercy, and I said that you have no character and integrity, so I hesitated to take you in. But I still imprisoned you here to see what kind of person you are. This is the second chance I'm giving you. But now you're bewitching a woman? You want to rely on her to help you escape. Not only do you have no integrity, but you're also despicable. You've indeed used up both chances. I'm indeed going to kill you. But you'll have a dignified death. Su Yusong said hatefully, but because you sowed discord and dared to sow discord between us and Shilio, not only will you die but you'll die miserably. 4 days later the Cloud Mountain will fall. The Taoist sect and the demons will also go to war. At that time, I want you to die miserably in front of the 2 armies, in front of all the cultivators and demons in the world. I'll also let people see what kind of ending the so-called intelligent Wei River Dragon King will end up in. Su Yusong said this, and while staring at Li Yunxin's eyes, his figure slowly faded. You can rest assured. People like you don't deserve to be a wandering soul. You'll be destroyed in body and soul, and no one will remember you. Chapter 472. After these calm but cold words faded away, Su Yusong's figure completely disappeared. The courtyard was still the courtyard, and there was still warm light in the night sky. However, the courtyard seemed to have changed from a cage to a death cage. Su Yusong disappeared. Li Yunxin didn't say a word. His face was calm. He slowly turned around and walked back to the house. When he entered the door, he lifted the curtain. The first time his hand slipped and only lifted a corner. He was too lazy to move his hand a second time, so he just walked in. The white cotton curtain slid past his face, looking like a shroud. After entering the house, he didn't do anything else. He walked to the bed and sat cross-legged as if he was adjusting his breathing. But he only sat for a quarter of an hour before lying down. It was as if some kind of emotion in his heart had made him unable to be calm. Everything he had done before had lost its meaning, but he didn't know what to do. Some people were abnormally calm when they were about to die, and they deserved the reputation of being calm. In the secular world, Li Yunxin's state at the moment belonged to that category. But as a cultivator, many details showed that his heart was not calm, and he was even a little scared. However, among these many details, there was a small detail that did not stand out. Li Yunxin let out a long breath gently. But Su Yusong and Zhuomuxia, who were looking at him in front of the mirror, didn't pay special attention to it. Because such a breath was more likely to be a breath of fear. Now you look like this again. Su Yusong looked at Li Yunxin coldly, not letting go of any of his actions. After watching for a quarter of an hour, he turned to the person behind him and said, "Do you see now? Li Yunxin has no feelings for you. Everything he did and said a few days ago was just a last-ditch struggle. When a person is about to die, he can do anything. Now I've finally exposed him. Do you still have the calmness you saw a few days ago?" Zhuomuxia stood beside him. The person behind him was Xian Shilio. At this moment, Xian Shilio didn't speak. He could only stare at Li Yunxin's reflection in the mirror, standing there in a daze. After a long while he finally spoke. His voice was soft, as if he didn't care about anything, just like Li Yunxin. "How do you plan to kill him in 4 days?" Su Yusong looked at Zhuomuxia. Naturally, first humiliate, then kill. This Li Yunxin, who knew how many places he had left as a backup plan. If he was killed silently on Mount Cloudy today, according to the impression many people had of him in the past, they would think that maybe he is not dead, but is just waiting for an opportunity to make a comeback. Those people and those things aren't worth our time and energy wasting. Therefore, this method was to let everyone know that he was completely dead. What wisdom, scheming, it was just a case of being too smart for one's own good. The tree fell. The monkeys scattered. That way I won't have anything to worry about. Xian Shilio bit her lip when she heard his words. She said in a low voice, "It turns out that senior brother didn't want him to die like this because he said something right." Zhuomuxia turned around and walked to her side. He raised his hand to tidy her hair, slightly lowered his head and looked at her seriously. "Since you know that everything Li Yunxin said before was to survive, how could you not know that he was just being alarmist? Was he exaggerating? Senior brother and sister wanted you to be a wandering soul not because of anything else. But the cultivation method of the cultivators of the Shenmen, to cultivate people into monsters like demons? What if you don't go through the tribulation? You will become like your senior brother Qing Liangchang, also crazy. So, they asked you to be a wandering soul but not to cultivate anything else, only the way of painting. Look at you now." Zhuomuxia gently pinched her sharp chin. "Beautiful and smart, happy and sad at the same time. Aren't you the most ordinary and the most extraordinary little girl? If it were someone else, why would senior brother and sister spend so much effort?" Xian Shilio blinked her eyes. Then, after saying this twice she said, "Then what about the people of Munanju? Won't they come to save Li Yunxin?" Zhuomuxia said a series of doting words, but Xian Shilio suddenly asked about Munanju. This female sword saint looked at him and seemed to be somewhat disappointed. She glanced at Su Yusong and sighed lightly. "Munanju, don't you know what Munanju is like?" Su Yusong thought for a moment and said in a low voice. When he mentioned the 3 words Munanju, his expression became slightly solemn. "You. Back then, you could be considered to have infiltrated into the core of our organization, but you could only send messages through a single line of communication with the people there. Until now, the person with the highest rank that we know is only the head manager of the branch. What have we been afraid of all these years? We were not afraid of them coming out, but afraid that they would not come out. We first infiltrated into the cultivators of the Xianmen and the demons. But they first infiltrated into the hundreds of millions of common people in the world. Until a few years ago, when we roughly controlled the Xianmen, when we wanted to control the world, we realized that among the people of the world, it was already their power, and it was very difficult to interfere. That's smart. Su Yusong snorted lowly. Even if our history is shorter than the Xianmen, it can still be considered to have existed for an eternity. But that Mu Nanju has only appeared in the world for 1 or 2,000 years. Now, it has already caused us to be afraid. But when they came to the world, their abilities were limited, and they were even more afraid of death than us mortals. They always hid behind the scenes and never showed themselves. The two of us obtained these two bodies and became sages. Thus, the two of us were also listed as elders. Hey, you and I both know it. First, it's because we've been dealing with the affairs of the human world these years, and our power has gradually grown. The wandering souls have also grown up. The two of us are no longer insignificant pawns in the eyes of the elders. Second, the two of us have been imprisoned in this little cloud mountain for 1,000 years. I'm afraid the elders are worried that once we go out, we won't be restrained anymore. He seemed to have said these words many times in the past. The elders are afraid of them, but they can't leave them. So they can only be imprisoned in this little cloud mountain and can't go out and let them take command. Zhuomuja frowned. Why are you suddenly talking about this? Su Yusong sneered. So, I naturally can't tell them that we're going to leave the mountain. If I say so, they won't agree. So what I'm talking about is the matter of the Ghost Emperor. His words stunned Zhuomuja, but he quickly smiled. I see, you've always told me that I don't need to worry about the matter of the Ghost Emperor and you'll handle it. So there's such a plan. It seemed that because the matter was about to succeed, the two of them were in a good mood. Hearing her say this, Su Yusong also smiled. You've already thought it through? Then tell me, have you seen through me? Zhuomuja smiled and also paced a few steps. Since you said that the matter of the mortal emperors would be left to you, it can be seen that you've already thought it through. Then, how could you not know that the Qing soldiers ran into Emperor Li and Emperor Yi and spread the news without restraint? But, at the time when those people sent people to Five Song Sword Sect, you didn't deal with it. Instead, you waited a few more days until the matter had spread like wildfire before sending people to cover up the lid. If you sent people because you truly wanted to put an end to this matter, you wouldn't have sent those stupid Taoist priests and swordsmen. But you ordered the Golden Light to send a transcendent realm swordsman who hadn't passed the tribulation of love. Naturally, you messed up the matter. Thus, it reached the ears of the various emperors. If the second step was also messed up, then the third step, if you truly wanted to handle it well, we had more people. You might as well send 2 true realm cultivators by each emperor's side. One to protect, one to guard against demons. But you only sent one. It really is like the style of those stupid Taoist priests. Thus, the matter of the Ghost Emperor finally happened. Originally, it could have been prevented, but now 2 emperors have done it. Originally, the 2 true realm cultivators could defend, but this time the 2 emperors can't defend. Zhuomuja thought for a moment. I'm guessing that you went to the top to see the elders at noon to talk about sending more cultivators to the mortal world. Su Yusong laughed loudly. Yes. Right now, the battle is imminent, but they still have no intention of letting our Chuyan Mountain go to the battlefield. Then we have to force them. I went to talk to them about the Ghost Emperor in the afternoon and said that 2 people can't defend anymore. We need 3 people. Originally, we only need to defend against the emperors, but now that the matter has spread to the entire world, how can only the emperors have such thoughts? For example, the popular empress, the regent, the ministers and officials who are loved by the people. If it's a big country, once they are enlightened, they are even more threatening than the emperors of small countries. Therefore, not only do we need 3 true realm cultivators to guard, we also need to send some transcendent realm cultivators to keep an eye on the people below. Thus, almost 1/3 of the people in the celestial sect can't go to the battlefield. Su Yusong smiled coldly. Guess what question the elders asked me when I told them about this? Zhuomuja thought for a moment, and a smile appeared on his face. This smile was the same as Su Yusong's. It was cold with a hint of pleasure. I guess they asked you about the safety of Yunshan. Yes. Su Yusong smiled coldly again. They want to overthrow the celestial sect, but they don't want to destroy Yunshan. They want Yunshan to still be high in the sky and be their safe nest. So, they asked me if we divide our forces, can we still ensure the safety of Yunshan on the basis of destroying the celestial sect? Then you agree at once. You said there's no problem. Zhuomuxia said with a smile. Then the elders seemed to be deep in thought. Su Yusong shook his head. Most of the time I really don't know what these celestial people are like. It doesn't matter how they are in the celestial realm, but now that they are in the mortal world, in my eyes they are a bunch of idiots. Extremely timid, hesitant in everything. It seems that one wrong step will lead to eternal damnation. But how can there be anything that is completely safe in this world? Just watch. Although I said there's no problem. But they will think about it at the top, and in the end, they will definitely send us out. Su Yusong took a deep breath. We have worked hard for so many years, just to make this situation happen today. It's been 1,000 years. We can finally leave this little cloud mountain. After he said this, the two suddenly fell silent. After a while, Zhuomuxia walked to his side, straightened his clothes and straightened his belt. We have been puppets for many years. She whispered in his ear. I hope we can succeed this time and go back to being ourselves. I also hope we can really do something for this world. Su Yusong smiled. Victory is already in our hands. Very soon it will all be ours. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.